They told her she was going west as a bride, but Clara Bennett knew the truth. She was the unwanted one, the plain shadow of a golden sister. The letter had asked for beauty. They sent desperation instead. When the stagecoach rattled toward Silver Creek, Colorado, Clara clutched a name that wasn't hers and a future built on lies. But waiting at the end of that dusty road was a man with kind eyes and a little girl who would see through every deception to the one truth that mattered. Love cannot be counterfeited. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment below with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled across the world. The autumn wind carried the scent of dying leaves and distant pine as Clara Bennett pressed her face against the stagecoach window, watching the world she knew disappear behind curtains of dust. Her fingers trembled against the worn leather of her traveling bag, the only possession her stepmother had allowed her to keep. Inside, wrapped in a faded cotton nightgown, lay the letter. The letter that had asked for Eloise. The letter that would seal Clara's fate with another woman's name. "You'll do what you're told," Cordelia had hissed that morning, her perfectly manicured nails digging into Clara's arm as she shoved her toward the waiting coach. "Your sister has prospects here. Real prospects. But that rancher out west? He wants a wife, and he'll get one, even if it's damaged goods like you." Clara had wanted to fight. She'd wanted to scream that she wasn't damaged, that she deserved more than being shipped off like unwanted cargo. But the bruises hidden beneath her high-necked dress told a different story. Cordelia's discipline, she called it. Character building. As if cruelty could build anything but walls around a wounded heart. The other passengers in the coach, a traveling salesman who reeked of whiskey and cheap cologne, and an elderly woman who'd fallen asleep the moment they departed St. Louis, paid Clara no attention. She was invisible, as she'd always been. The plain daughter, the spinster at 23, the one her father had loved but couldn't protect, not after consumption took him and left his daughters in Cordelia's venomous care. "Miss Bennett?" The driver's voice jolted her from her thoughts as the coach lurched to a stop. "We're changing horses. 15 minutes if you need to stretch your legs." Clara stepped down onto the packed earth of the way station, her legs unsteady after hours of rattling over rutted roads. The September sun hung low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust. West. She was going west to a place called Silver Creek, to a man named Elias Ward, who believed he was getting Eloise Bennett. Beautiful, charming Eloise, with her golden curls and practiced smile. What would he do when he saw Clara instead? Plain, quiet Clara with her mud-brown hair and too thin frame? The dress she wore, one of Eloise's cast-offs, taken in hastily by Clara's own needle, hung loose in places where a woman should curve. Her hands were rough from years of scrubbing floors and tending the garden Cordelia claimed as her own. "You drinking or buying?" The way station keeper's gruff voice interrupted her spiral of anxiety. "I'm sorry?" "Water's free. Everything else costs. Just water, please." He jerked his head toward a pump in the yard. As Clara worked the handle, she caught her reflection in a rain barrel nearby. Hazel eyes too large for her face. Skin pale from too many hours locked in the attic sewing room. Lips pressed thin from years of swallowing words that would earn her a beating. "This is who you are," she thought. "This is all you'll ever be." "Final boarding," the driver called. Clara climbed back into the coach, and the journey continued. Hours became days. They stopped at way stations in small frontier towns where the buildings looked like they might blow away with the next strong wind. The landscape changed from rolling hills to dramatic peaks that pierced the sky like teeth. "Colorado," the sign said. The territory of Colorado, though Clara had heard talk that statehood was coming soon. On the fourth day, as dawn painted the eastern sky pink and gold, the driver called back, "Silver Creek, dead ahead!" Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She pulled the letter from her bag one more time, even though she'd memorized every word. "Dear Miss Eloise Bennett, your letter of inquiry has given me hope. I thought long buried. Silver Creek is a good town with good people, but a rancher's life is hard, and harder still without a partner to share the burden. My daughter Rose is 6 years old and hasn't spoken more than a whisper since her mother passed 2 years ago. The doctor says there's nothing wrong with her throat. It's her heart that's wounded. I'm not a man of fancy words. I can offer you a solid home, honest work, and a child who needs a mother's gentle hand. If you're truly willing to build a life here, I'll do everything in my power to make you happy. The coach arrives every Wednesday. I'll be waiting. Yours in hope, Elias Ward. Yours in hope. Clara folded the letter carefully, guilt rising like bile in her throat. This man, this Elias Ward, had poured his heart onto paper, had dared to hope again after loss, and she was about to repay his vulnerability with deception. But what choice did she have? Return to St. Louis? To Cordelia's fists and Eloise's casual cruelty? To a future scrubbing other people's floors until her hands bled and her back bent? No. Whatever waited in Silver Creek, it couldn't be worse than what she was leaving behind. The coach rolled into town as the sun climbed higher. Silver Creek was smaller than Clara had imagined. A single main street lined with wooden buildings that wore their age proudly. A general store, a saloon, a church with a white steeple that caught the morning light. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks still dusted with early snow. "Silver Creek," the driver announced. "End of the line for some of you." Clara's hands shook as she gathered her bag. Through the window, she could see people going about their morning business. A woman sweeping the steps of the general store. Men loading supplies onto a wagon. Children chasing a dog down the dusty street. And standing beside a weather-beaten buckboard, a man in a brown coat and wide-brimmed hat. Even from a distance, Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the brim of his hat. Waiting. Hoping. Elias Ward. The door opened. The salesman stumbled out first, stretching and complaining about his back. The elderly woman followed, greeted by a younger woman who must have been her daughter. And then it was Clara's turn. She stepped down, and the world seemed to tilt slightly. The mountain air was thinner here, sharper, or maybe it was just fear stealing her breath. Elias Ward was walking toward her, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair touched by silver at the temples. Maybe 35, maybe older. The sun and wind had weathered his face in a way that made aging hard to judge. But his eyes, dark brown and currently filled with nervous anticipation, those were young somehow. Hopeful. "Miss Bennett?" His voice was deep, careful. "Eloise Bennett?" This was the moment. The moment Clara should tell the truth, should explain the mistake, the deception, should turn around and beg the driver to take her anywhere else. Instead, she heard herself say, "Yes, I'm Eloise." The lie tasted like ashes on her tongue. Relief broke across Elias's face like sunrise. "Thank God. I was afraid, well, I wasn't sure you'd actually come." He reached for her bag, his movements gentle despite his obvious strength. "The trip must have been difficult. Are you hungry? Tired? The house is about 20 minutes outside of town, but we can stop at the cafe first if you need—" "I'm fine," Clara interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." He studied her for a moment, and Clara felt exposed, certain he could see through her lie. But then he smiled, a small, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and gestured toward the buckboard. "Rose is at home with Mrs. Kowalski, our neighbor. She's been nervous about meeting you. She's a shy one, my Rose." As Elias helped Clara onto the wagon seat, his hand steadying her elbow, she noticed the calluses on his palm. Working hands. Honest hands. The guilt in her stomach twisted tighter. The wagon rolled out of town, following a dirt road that wound between golden aspens and dark pines. Elias kept up a steady stream of conversation, perhaps sensing Clara's nervousness. "The ranch isn't much, about 40 acres with a creek running through. I've got cattle, some chickens, a vegetable garden that does better some years than others. The house needs work, I won't lie about that. The roof leaked something fierce last winter, but I patched it. And the front porch—" He trailed off, looking embarrassed. "I'm better with cattle than carpentry, truth be told." "I'm sure it's fine," Clara managed. "Your letters mentioned you helped your mother with household matters before she passed. I want you to know I don't expect miracles. Rose and we've managed. But it would be nice to have—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It would be nice to have someone who made it feel like a home again, instead of just a place we sleep." Clara's throat tightened. The real Eloise's letters Clara had been forced to copy in her sister's elegant handwriting while Cordelia dictated every word, had painted a picture of a refined young woman eager for adventure, skilled in all the domestic arts, cheerful and bright. Clara was none of those things. She could sew because Cordelia had forced her to. She could cook because someone had to feed her father before he died. She could manage a household because she'd been doing it since she was 12 years old. But refined, cheerful, the lies were stacking up like stones, building a wall between who she really was and who Elias thought she was. "There it is," Elias said, pointing ahead. The house sat in a clearing where the land leveled out, backed by pine-covered hills. It was larger than Clara expected, a two-story structure built from logs and rough-hewn boards, with a stone chimney rising from one end. The porch did sag slightly, as Elias had mentioned, and several of the shutters hung crooked. But there were flowers, wildflowers, in a patch by the front steps, their purple and yellow blooms defiant against the approaching autumn. A woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was older, perhaps 50, with iron gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. "Mrs. Kowalski?" Elias called as he pulled the wagon to a stop. "We're home." "About time," the woman said, but her eyes were kind as they settled on Clara. "So this is the bride? Child, you look half-starved. Come inside and I'll fix you something proper." Before Clara could protest, Mrs. Kowalski had ushered her into the house, chattering about the stew on the stove and how Rose had been wound up tighter than a pocket watch all morning. The interior of the house was simple but clean. A main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. Handmade furniture, a table, chairs, a rocking chair by the fire, spoke of careful craftsmanship even if the pieces didn't match. Stairs led to a second floor, and Clara could see two doors up there, both closed. "Rose," Elias called. "Come down, honey. Miss Bennett is here." For a long moment, nothing. Then one of the doors upstairs opened slowly, and small feet appeared on the stairs. Clara's breath caught. The child who descended was tiny for 6 years old, with dark hair like her father's, and eyes that seemed too large, too solemn for such a young face. She wore a simple calico dress that was slightly too short. She'd grown since it was made, Clara realized. And she moved with a cautiousness that broke Clara's heart, as if the world had taught her to tread carefully. At the bottom of the stairs, Rose stopped, her eyes fixed on Clara, and Clara felt the weight of that gaze, assessing, hoping, afraid. "Hello, Rose," Clara said softly, kneeling so she was at the child's level. "It's very nice to meet you." Rose didn't speak, didn't move, but her eyes, those dark, careful eyes, never left Clara's face. "She doesn't talk much," Elias said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Clara pretended not to notice. "But she understands everything. Don't you, Rose?" The little girl nodded, just barely. Clara's heart twisted. This child, this beautiful wounded child, deserved so much more than a woman built on lies. But before Clara could spiral further into guilt, Rose took a small step forward, then another, until she stood directly in front of Clara, so close their noses almost touched. "I'm very pleased to meet you, Rose," Clara repeated, even gentler this time. And then Rose did something that shattered every wall Clara had built around her heart. The child reached out and touched Clara's face, her small fingers tracing the line of Clara's cheekbone with infinite gentleness, as if trying to memorize her, as if trying to make sure she was real. "All right now," Mrs. Kowalski said, her voice suspiciously husky. "Let's get some food in you all before this stew turns to leather. Rose, set the table for me, will you?" Rose nodded and moved to obey, casting glances back at Clara every few seconds. Over lunch, and Mrs. Kowalski's stew was as good as promised, Clara learned the rhythms of this household. Elias spoke little but listened carefully. Rose ate slowly, methodically, still watching Clara as if she might disappear. Mrs. Kowalski kept up a steady stream of information about the neighbors, the town, the approaching winter. "Elias tells me you're from St. Louis," Mrs. Kowalski said, refilling Clara's coffee cup. "Must be quite a change coming to a place like this." "Yes," Clara managed. "Quite a change." "Well, you'll adapt. Women always do. The Lord knows we're made of stronger stuff than men give us credit for." She patted Elias's shoulder affectionately. "Present company accepted, of course." After lunch, Mrs. Kowalski gathered her things. I'll be heading home now. My own husband will be wondering where I've gone. Rose, you be good for your papa and Miss Bennet. Here? Another nod from Rose. When the older woman had gone, an awkward silence settled over the house. Elias cleared his throat. I prepared the upstairs bedroom for you, the one at the front. It gets good morning light. Rose's room is the smaller one at the back, and I've been sleeping. He gestured toward a narrow cot in a corner of the main room, barely visible behind a privacy screen. I didn't want to presume anything. I know the letters talked about marriage, but I thought you might want time to settle in first. To be sure this is what you want. The kindness in his words made Clara want to weep. Here was a man who had every right to expect a wife immediately. They'd corresponded for months, made promises, but instead he was offering her space, time, choice. Thank you, she whispered. That's very thoughtful. Rose, why don't you show Miss Bennet her room? The child moved immediately to the stairs, and Clara followed. The bedroom was small but charming, with a real bed covered in a quilt that had clearly been made with care. A dresser, a chair by the window, a small mirror on the wall, simple but clean, ready for her. Rose stood in the doorway, still watching with those two serious eyes. Clara sat on the bed, testing the mattress. This is very nice. Did your papa make the quilt? A shake of the head. Your mama? A nod, and something flickered across Rose's face. Grief, but old grief. Worn smooth by time, but never forgotten. It's beautiful work, Clara said softly. She must have been very talented. Rose crossed the room and climbed onto the bed beside Clara, her movements careful, seeking permission with every inch. When Clara didn't pull away, the child settled against her side, warm and small and trusting. They sat like that for a long time, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window. Clara wanted to say something profound, something that would make this moment less fragile, but words felt inadequate. So she simply wrapped an arm around Rose's shoulders and let the silence speak for them. Downstairs, she could hear Elias moving around, the creak of floorboards and rustle of papers. An honest man living an honest life, waiting for a bride he believed was honest too. Clara closed her eyes against the guilt. That evening, she helped prepare dinner, or tried to. Her cooking skills were adequate, but nothing special, and she could tell Elias was surprised by her hesitance in the kitchen. The letters from Eloise had boasted of culinary talents Clara didn't possess. I'm a bit rusty, she lied, burning herself on the pot handle and nearly oversalting the beans. The journey was tiring. Of course, Elias said quickly. Here, let me help. They worked side by side, and Clara became acutely aware of his presence, the warmth of him, the careful way he moved around her, never crowding, always respectful. He was nothing like the men she'd known in St. Louis. Cordelia's friends, with their wandering hands and cruel jokes. The shopkeepers who spoke to her bosom instead of her face. The banker who'd suggested there were ways she could extend her father's debt payments. Elias was different, good, and she was deceiving him with every breath. After dinner, Rose brought Clara a book, a worn copy of fairy tales with faded illustrations. She held it out with both hands, an offering, a request. Would you like me to read to you? Clara asked, a vigorous nod. They settled into the rocking chair by the fire, Rose curled in Clara's lap like she'd been doing it all her life. Elias sat at the table, pretending to review accounts, but watching them from the corner of his eye. Clara opened the book and began to read. Once upon a time, in a kingdom far away, there lived a princess who... Rose's weight was warm against her chest. The firelight danced across the pages, and for just a moment Clara let herself pretend this was real. That she belonged here, that she was the woman this child needed and this man hoped for. When the story ended, Rose was yawning, fighting to keep her eyes open. Bedtime for you, little one, Elias said, rising from the table, but Rose shook her head stubbornly and burrowed deeper against Clara. Rose, Elias said, firmer this time, Miss Bennet is tired too. She needs her rest. What? The child's lower lip trembled. Clara felt it against her collarbone, that tiny, devastating tremble. I could put her to bed, Clara heard herself say. If that's all right. Relief flooded Elias's face. Would you? I usually... But she seems so comfortable with you already. Clara carried Rose upstairs, the child's arms wrapped tight around her neck. Rose's room was tiny but cozy, with a small bed covered in another handmade quilt, and a shelf holding a few carved wooden animals that must have been Elias's work. As Clara helped her into a nightgown and tucked her under the covers, Rose's hand caught hers. The child's lips moved, and Clara leaned close to hear the whispered words. "Stay." It was barely more than a breath, but it was the first word Rose had spoken to her. "I'm just next door," Clara said gently. "Right through that wall. If you need anything, I'll hear you." Rose's grip tightened. So Clara sat on the edge of the bed, stroking the child's dark hair until her breathing evened out and her hand relaxed. Even then, Clara stayed a few more minutes, memorizing the curve of Rose's cheek, the sweep of her lashes. This child who'd been hurt by loss and now dared to hope again. "I'll try," Clara whispered into the darkness. "I'll try to be what you need, I promise." It was a promise she had no right to make, built on a foundation of lies. But in that moment, with moonlight silvering the small room and Rose's soft breathing the only sound, Clara meant it with every fiber of her being. When she finally crept back downstairs, Elias was still at the table, the accounts forgotten. He looked up, and something passed between them, something wordless but significant. "Thank you," he said. She hasn't let anyone but me and Mrs. Kowalski near her since her mother passed. The way she took to you," his voice roughened. "Maybe God knew what he was doing after all." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. God. As if the divine had orchestrated this deception. As if Clara's lies were somehow part of a greater plan. "I should get some rest," she managed, heading for the stairs. "Miss Bennet, Eloise." She stopped, not turning around, afraid he'd see the guilt written on her face. "I'm glad you came. I know it's early, and I know I'm probably not what you imagined from the letters. But I want you to know I'll do everything I can to make you happy here. You and Rose, you're my family now. That means something to me." Family. The word wrapped around Clara's heart and squeezed. She'd never had a real family, not after her mother died and her father remarried. Cordelia had made sure of that. But here was this man, this good, honest man, offering her exactly what she'd always wanted but never believed she deserved, and she was taking it through deception. "Good night, Elias," she whispered, and fled to her room before he could see her tears. That night, lying in bed beneath the quilt Rose's dead mother had made, Clara stared at the ceiling and tried to form a plan. She should tell the truth. Tomorrow, in the clear light of day, she should sit Elias down and explain everything. The stepmother, the substitution, the desperation that had driven her here. He would send her away, of course. She'd lied, deceived him, betrayed his trust. He had every right to put her on the next coach back to St. Louis. But then she remembered Rose's small hand in hers, Rose's whispered "stay." The way the child had looked at her like she was something precious, something worth hoping for. Could she leave, knowing what it would do to Rose? The child had already lost one mother. Could Clara become her second loss? The questions chased themselves in circles until exhaustion finally pulled Clara under. She dreamed of trains and stagecoaches, of running down endless roads while voices called her name. Clara. Eloise. Clara. Eloise. Until she no longer knew which one she was supposed to answer to. She woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee. For a disoriented moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory crashed back, and with it, the weight of yesterday's lies. Clara dressed quickly in another of Eloise's cast-off dresses and made her way downstairs. Elias was at the stove, working on breakfast with the competence of someone who'd been doing it alone for too long. Rose sat at the table, already dressed, watching the stairs with an intensity that suggested she'd been waiting. When Rose saw Clara, her whole face lit up. Not quite a smile, Clara sensed that would take time, but something close, something hopeful. "Good morning," Clara said softly. "Morning," Elias called from the stove. "I wasn't sure what you liked for breakfast, so I made a bit of everything. Eggs, bacon, biscuits. The biscuits are from Mrs. Kowalski. She dropped them by yesterday because she says mine are like eating river stones." The self-deprecating humor made Clara smile despite everything. She joined them at the table, and they ate together. A strange little family bound by hope and deception in equal measure. After breakfast, Elias headed out to tend the cattle, promising to return by lunch. "Make yourself at home," he said at the door. "Everything here is yours to explore, to change if you want. I know the house isn't much, but—" "It's perfect," Clara interrupted. "Really, it's perfect." He smiled, touched the brim of his hat, and was gone. Alone with Rose, Clara looked around the house with new eyes. It was clean but unloved, functional but not comfortable. The house of two people surviving, not living. "What do you say we make this place a little more like home?" Clara asked Rose. The child nodded eagerly. They spent the morning transforming the space. Clara found fabric remnants in a trunk, pieces of Rose's mother's sewing projects probably, and fashioned them into curtains for the windows. Rose helped measure and cut, her small hands surprisingly steady. They rearranged furniture, swept corners that had been neglected, hung the cast-iron pots on hooks near the stove so they'd be easier to reach. As they worked, Clara told stories, not fairy tales from books, but stories from her own childhood, back before her mother died, when there had been laughter in their home. She told Rose about the garden her mother had kept, about the cat who'd lived in their barn, about the time Clara had tried to bake bread and ended up with something hard enough to use as a doorstop. Rose didn't speak, but she listened, and slowly, gradually, her movements became less careful. She started to reach for things without hesitation, to move through the house like she belonged there, instead of like a ghost haunting the edges. By the time Elias returned, the house had been transformed. Curtains softened the harsh mountain light. Cushions on the chairs made them inviting. The table held a simple centerpiece Rose had created from pine cones and colored leaves. Small changes, but significant ones. Elias stood in the doorway, stunned. How did you—" "Rose and I thought we'd do a bit of organizing," Clara said, suddenly uncertain. "If you don't like it, we can change it back." "Like it?" He shook his head, still taking it in. "Eloise, this is wonderful. Rose, did you help?" A proud nod from the child. "That's my girl." He crossed to Rose and kissed the top of her head, then looked at Clara with an expression that made her chest ache. "Thank you. You can't know what this means, coming home to this." That night, after another dinner and another story by the fire, after Rose had gone to bed and Clara had stayed until the child was deeply asleep, Clara sat at the table while Elias worked on repairing a broken harness. "Your letters mentioned you played piano," he said, not looking up from his work. "I'm sorry we don't have one. Maybe someday, if we can afford." "I don't play very well," Clara interrupted, another lie catching her tongue. The real Eloise played beautifully. Clara had never touched a piano in her life. "I exaggerated in my letters. I didn't want you to think I was completely without accomplishments." Elias looked up then, his dark eyes soft. "Eloise, I don't care if you can't play a single note. The way you are with Rose, the way you've made this house feel like home again, in less than 2 days, that's worth more than all the piano playing in the world." The kindness in his words was a knife to her heart. "Tell me about your family," he said, returning to his work. "Your letters mentioned you had a sister?" Clara's blood froze. She'd been so focused on the immediate deception, on pretending to be Eloise, that she hadn't thought about the stories she'd need to maintain. "Yes," she said carefully. "A sister, younger. We weren't close." "And your stepmother? She approved of you coming here?" "Approved? What a gentle way to describe being forced onto a coach and sent away like garbage." "She thought it was for the best," Clara said, which was at least partially true. "Do you miss her? Your family?" "No," Clara said, and that at least was completely honest. "I don't miss them at all." Something in her voice must have betrayed more than she intended, because Elias set down his tools and looked at her carefully. "Were they unkind to you?" The question was so direct, so compassionate, that Clara felt tears threaten. She stood abruptly, moving toward the fire. "It doesn't matter now. That life is behind me." She felt rather than heard him move closer. He didn't touch her. He was too respectful for that. But his presence was a comfort nonetheless. "Whatever happened back there," he said quietly, "you're safe here. You and Rose, you're under my protection now. I know I'm not much, Just a rancher with rough hands and a house that leaks. But I promise you, Eloise, no one will hurt you here. Not ever. The tears Clara had been holding back spilled over. She turned away, trying to hide them, but Elias was already moving, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket and pressing it into her hands. I'm sorry, she managed. I don't know what's wrong with me. Nothing's wrong with you. You've been through a lot. New place, new people, leaving everything you knew behind. He paused, then added, It's all right to cry. God knows this house has seen enough tears. What's a few more between friends? Friends. Not husband and wife, not even bride and groom. Friends. Clara wiped her eyes and tried to smile. Thank you for understanding. Always, he said simply. The days that followed developed a rhythm. Elias worked the ranch, rising before dawn and often not returning until dusk. Clara learned to manage the household, discovering that without Cordelia's constant criticism, she was actually quite competent. She could cook more than adequately when she wasn't terrified of making mistakes. She kept the house clean without obsessing over invisible specks of dust. She mended clothes and tended the vegetable garden, and even learned to milk the cow without getting kicked. And Rose was opening up like a flower in spring. Still quiet, still cautious, but there was a light in her eyes that Elias said hadn't been there in 2 years. She followed Clara everywhere, helping with chores, sitting close during meals, bringing Clara wildflowers and interesting stones, and once, memorably, a very confused grasshopper in a jar. For you, she whispered, pushing the jar into Clara's hands. He's green. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. It was only the 4th time Rose had spoken to her, and each word felt like a gift. He's beautiful, Clara said seriously, but I think he might be happier outside with his friends. Should we let him go together? They released the grasshopper in the garden, watching it disappear into the vegetables. Rose slipped her hand into Clara's and held tight. Stay, she whispered again. That word that was becoming a prayer, a plea, a promise she needed Clara to make. I'm not going anywhere, Clara said, kneeling to look Rose in the eye. I promise. It was a lie. Eventually the truth would come out. It always did. But for now, in this moment, Clara meant it with her whole heart. 2 weeks after her arrival, Mrs. Kowalski invited them to dinner. Her house was smaller than Elias's, but warm and filled with the smell of good cooking. Her husband, Joseph, was a quiet man with kind eyes who spent most of the evening carving a small horse for Rose while the women talked. That child has come alive since you arrived, Mrs. Kowalski said, watching Rose play with the wooden animals Joseph had made for her over the years. I've been telling Elias for months he needed to find a wife, someone to help shoulder the load, but I never expected... She paused, her sharp eyes studying Clara. You're not quite what I expected. Clara's heart stuttered. What do you mean? From his description of your letters, I thought you'd be... Mrs. Kowalski waved a hand vaguely. More flashy, full of yourself, but you're quiet, gentle, good with Rose. She leaned closer. Whatever you wrote in those letters, girl, you're better than your words made you sound. Well, relief flooded through Clara, though the guilt remained. Thank you. He's falling in love with you, you know. Mrs. Kowalski said it matter-of-factly, as if commenting on the weather. Elias, I've known him since he came to Silver Creek 8 years ago, watched him grieve for Sarah, thought he might never smile again. But these past 2 weeks, he smiles. Clara didn't know what to say to that. Just don't break his heart, Mrs. Kowalski continued. Or Rose's. That child's been through enough. I would never... Clara started, then stopped. Because wasn't that exactly what she was doing? Building up their hopes on a foundation of lies that would eventually crumble? That night, lying in bed, Clara heard voices through the wall. Elias was putting Rose to bed, and though Clara couldn't make out the words, she could hear the rumble of his voice and Rose's occasional soft response. Then, clear as a bell, she heard Rose say, Do you like her, Papa? A pause. Then Elias's voice, warm and certain. Yes, sweetheart. I like her very much. Do you? She smells like flowers, and she tells good stories, and she doesn't get mad when I'm quiet. That's because she understands that people hurt in different ways, and that's okay. Mama used to smell like flowers, too. She did, But Rose, loving Miss Bennet, if you come to love her, that doesn't mean we forget Mama. There's room in our hearts for both. Do you understand? I think so, Papa. Yes? I prayed for God to send us someone, and he sent her. That means she's supposed to stay forever, right? Clara pressed her fist against her mouth to stifle a sob. I hope so, sweetheart. I surely do hope so. After Rose was asleep, Elias knocked softly on Clara's door. I'm sorry if we disturbed you, he said when she opened it. Rose had questions. I heard. Clara managed a shaky smile. It's a thin wall. Eloise, I need to ask you something. He looked uncomfortable, his hat literally in his hands. The minister, Reverend Calhoun, he's asked when we want to have the ceremony. The official marriage ceremony, I mean. I told him I wanted to give you time to adjust, to be sure. But he says it's not proper, us living under the same roof without... He broke off, color rising in his cheeks. I would never pressure you. If you need more time or if you've changed your mind, I'd understand. I could arrange passage back to St. Louis. No! The word came out sharper than Clara intended. I mean, I don't want to go back. I want to stay. Here, with you and Rose. Relief flooded his face. Then, would a week from Sunday be acceptable? For the ceremony? Nothing elaborate, just something simple at the church? A week from Sunday, 10 days to become Elias Ward's wife, legally, officially, forever. 10 days before the lie became permanent. Clara should refuse, should tell the truth, should... Yes, she heard herself say. A week from Sunday would be perfect. After he'd gone, Clara pulled the letter from its hiding place in her dresser drawer and read it again by candlelight. Your letter of inquiry has given me hope I thought long buried. She'd stolen that hope, stolen this life. But she'd also brought Rose back to life, had made Elias smile again, had transformed a house into a home. Wasn't that worth something? Clara folded the letter carefully and tucked it away. 10 days. She had 10 days to figure out how to live with the woman she was becoming. Part Clara Bennett, part Eloise's ghost, and entirely trapped in a deception of her own making. Outside, the mountain wind sang through the pines, and somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. Clara blew out her candle and lay in the dark, listening to the sounds of her borrowed life, and tried not to think about the reckoning that must eventually come. The following morning brought a crispness to the air that whispered of winter's approach. Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching frost melt from the grass as the sun climbed higher, and tried to calm the storm in her chest. 10 days. In 10 days, she would stand before God and the people of Silver Creek and promise to love, honor, and cherish Elias Ward, all while wearing another woman's name like a stolen coat. You're up early. Elias's voice behind her was soft, careful not to startle. He moved to the stove, stirring the embers back to life. Couldn't sleep? Just thinking, Clara said, not turning from the window. If she looked at him, at the honest concern in his eyes, she might break apart entirely. About the wedding? He measured coffee into the pot with practiced efficiency. If you're having doubts, Eloise, we can wait longer. There's no rush. But there was. Clara could feel time pressing against her like a physical weight. Every day she stayed made the lie bigger, the eventual truth more devastating. And yet the thought of leaving, of never seeing Rose's shy smile again, of never hearing Elias's low laugh, was unbearable. No doubts, she lied. I was just admiring how beautiful it is here, the mountains in the morning light. He came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. They stood in silence, watching the world wake up, and Clara wondered if he could hear her heart hammering against her ribs. Sarah, Rose's mother. She used to stand right here every morning, Elias said quietly. Said it was like watching God paint a new picture every day. She was good at finding beauty in simple things. He paused, his reflection ghostly in the window glass. You remind me of her sometimes, not in looks, but in the way you are with Rose. The gentleness. Clara's throat tightened. Tell me about her, if it's not too painful. Elias was quiet for a long moment, and Clara thought perhaps she'd overstepped. But then he began to speak, his voice steady but weighted with old grief. We met in Denver. She was a school teacher, came west from Pennsylvania to help start a school for minors' children. I was delivering cattle to market and saw her trying to wrangle 20 kids during their lunch break. She had dirt on her nose and her hair was falling out of its pins, and she was laughing. He smiled at the memory. I think I fell in love with her right then, watching her laugh while those kids climbed all over her like puppies. We married quick, too quick, some said. But when you know, you know. She moved out here with me, left her teaching behind. Sometimes I think she regretted that, giving up something she loved for a man and a ranch in the middle of nowhere. But she never complained, just threw herself into making a home, making a life. She sounds wonderful, Clara whispered. She was. And then Rose came, and Sarah she glowed. Being a mother was everything she'd hoped it would be. For 4 years, we were... His voice cracked slightly. We were happy, really, truly happy. Then came the fever, started in town, spread through the valley like wildfire. Sarah was helping nurse the sick. That was her way, always helping. She caught it herself, and by the time we realized how bad it was... He stopped, drawing a shaky breath. She lasted 3 days. 3 days of fighting, of me begging God to spare her, of Rose crying in the next room because children know when something's wrong, even if they don't understand what. The morning she died, Sarah made me promise 2 things. First, that I'd make sure Rose knew she was loved, that her mother hadn't wanted to leave her, and second, he turned to look at Clara directly now, his eyes bright with unshed tears. She made me promise I wouldn't spend the rest of my life alone, that I'd find someone else, someone who could love Rose like she deserved. She said life was too short for loneliness, and Rose needed a mother. Clara felt tears sliding down her own cheeks. That was generous of her, in her final moments, to think of your happiness. It nearly killed me, making that promise. Felt like I was betraying her before she was even gone. But Sarah, she just squeezed my hand and said, "Love isn't pie, Elias. There's not less when you share it. There's more." Those were her last words. There's more. The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Clara reached out instinctively and took Elias's hand, and he gripped hers like a lifeline. I waited 2 years, he continued, told myself I was honoring her memory, but really I was just afraid. Afraid to open my heart again. Afraid no one could ever compare. And then your letter arrived. Well, your first letter, responding to my advertisement. And something about the way you wrote. About your hope for a fresh start. For a chance to build something real. He shook his head. I don't know if I believe in signs, but it felt like Sarah was telling me it was time. Clara wanted to die. Right there, standing in the morning light with this good man's hand in hers, she wanted the earth to open and swallow her whole. Because she wasn't the woman he thought had written those letters. She was an imposter, a liar, someone who didn't deserve his trust or his dead wife's blessing. Elias, she started, not knowing what she would say, but knowing she had to say something. I need to tell you. Papa? Rose's sleepy voice from the stairs cut through the moment. I'm hungry. Elias released Clara's hand and turned to his daughter with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Morning, little Rose. Let's get some breakfast in you. The moment was lost, and Clara felt the weight of her unsaid confession settle back onto her chest like a stone. They spent the day preparing for the wedding in small, practical ways. Mrs. Kowalski arrived mid-morning with fabric for a dress. Nothing fancy, just something prettier than those worn-out things you've been living in, and set about measuring Clara with the efficiency of a woman who'd been sewing for 50 years. You're thinner than I expected, Mrs. Kowalski commented, pins in her mouth as she marked the fabric. Those letters made you sound like a robust girl, farm-raised, plenty of good food. Clara's stomach clenched. Another way the real Eloise differed from her. I lost weight during the journey, the stress of leaving home. Mrs. Kowalski's eyes were sharp, assessing. Well, we'll feed you up proper. Can't have Elias's bride looking like a strong wind could blow her away. What do you think, Rose? Blue or green? Rose, who'd been watching the proceedings with solemn interest, pointed to the blue fabric. Blue it is. Matches your eyes anyway, Mrs. Kowalski said to Clara. Now hold still while I pin this bodice. While they worked, Mrs. Kowalski kept up a steady stream of conversation, filling Clara in on the town's gossip and the people she'd be meeting at the wedding. The Hendersons, who ran the general store, the Callahan family with their 6 red-headed children, old Mr. Chen, who'd come from California during the gold rush and stayed to open a laundry, the widow Thompson, who played organ at the church and had opinions about everything. "They'll all be curious about you," Mrs. Kowalski said, her hands never stopping their work. "Small town like this, a new bride is big news, especially for Elias. He's well-liked, and folks have been worried about him and Rose managing alone. They'll want to make sure you're good enough for them." The pressure in Clara's chest increased. A whole town watching, judging, expecting. A whole community she'd have to deceive. "What if I'm not?" The words slipped out before Clara could stop them. "Good enough, I mean." Mrs. Kowalski paused, looking up from her pinning. "Child, if you weren't good enough, Rose wouldn't look at you the way she does. That girl's heart has been locked up tight for 2 years. You opened it in less than 2 weeks. That's not something you can fake." If only that were true. But Clara was faking everything. Her name, her history, her right to be here at all. That afternoon, while Rose napped and Mrs. Kowalski headed home with the dress pieces to finish the sewing, Clara found herself alone with her thoughts. She wandered outside, following a worn path that led from the house toward the creek Elias had mentioned. The aspens were turning gold, their leaves trembling in the breeze like coins hanging from branches. The creek, when she found it, was narrow but clear, bubbling over smooth stones worn down by years of water. Clara sat on the bank and let the sound of it wash over her, peaceful, constant, honest in a way she was not. "Mama used to come here too," Clara started, turning to find Rose standing a few feet away. The child must have woken and followed her. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude on your mama's special place," Clara said. Rose shook her head and came to sit beside Clara, her small body warm against Clara's side. For a while they just watched the water, companionable in their silence. "Do you miss her?" Clara asked gently. "Your mama?" Rose nodded, her expression sad but not devastated. Time had done its work, if not its healing. "I don't remember her face anymore," Rose whispered, and the admission seemed to hurt her. "Papa says I look like her, but when I try to remember, it's all fuzzy, like looking through fog." Clara's heart ached for this child who'd lost so much so young. She wrapped an arm around Rose's shoulders and pulled her close. "That's okay, sweetheart. Our memories can't always hold on to pictures, but they hold on to feelings. Do you remember how she made you feel?" Rose considered this, her small face serious. "Safe and warm and like I was the most important thing in the whole world." "Then you remember the things that matter most," Clara said softly. "The feeling of being loved that stays forever, even when faces get fuzzy." "Do you love us?" Rose asked, looking up at Clara with those 2 wise eyes. "Me and Papa?" The question hung in the air between them, impossible and necessary. Clara thought about lying, about giving some diplomatic non-answer, but Rose deserved better than more lies. "Yes," Clara said, and realized with a shock that it was true. Somewhere between the stagecoach and this creek bank, between the first dinner and the 100th small kindness, she'd fallen in love with this strange little family. "I love you both very much." Rose's face lit up with a smile so bright it hurt to look at. "I knew it. I knew God would send the right one." There it was again. God, divine providence, as if Clara's deception was somehow part of a holy plan. The guilt was becoming unbearable. "Rose, I need to tell you something," Clara began, not sure what she was going to say, but knowing she couldn't carry this alone anymore. "I'm not—" "There you two are," Elias's voice carried across the clearing. He was walking toward them, carrying a fishing pole and a can of worms. "I thought we might try to catch something for dinner. Rose, want to help?" Rose jumped up, excited, and the moment for confession passed. Again. They spent the rest of the afternoon by the creek, and Clara watched Elias teach Rose how to bait a hook, how to cast without tangling the line, how to wait with patience for the fish to bite. He was gentle with her, never frustrated when she made mistakes, always encouraging. And when Rose finally caught a small trout, his proud smile made Clara's chest hurt. This was what a father should be, what family should be. And Clara was tainting it all with her lies. That evening, after they'd cleaned and cooked the fish Rose had caught, after dinner had been eaten and dishes washed, after Rose had been tucked into bed with yet another story, Clara and Elias sat by the fire in companionable silence. He was carving something from a piece of wood, another animal for Rose's collection, Clara guessed, and she was mending one of his shirts, the domesticity of the scene almost painful in its normalcy. "I've been thinking about the wedding," Elias said, not looking up from his carving, "about what comes after." Clara's needles stilled. "After? We'll be married, legally, before God and everyone, but I want you to know—" He set down his carving and looked at her directly. "I won't expect anything from you that you're not ready to give. The marriage can be in name only for as long as you need. Your room will remain yours. I'll continue sleeping down here. If you want more, that'll be your decision." The kindness of it, the respect, made Clara want to weep. "Elias, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. You left everything you knew, came out here on faith. The least I can do is make sure you feel safe, that you have choices." He picked up the carving again, his cheeks slightly flushed. "I know the letters talked about a real marriage, about building a life together in all ways, and I want that eventually, but I can wait. I'm good at waiting." Clara set down her mending, her hands shaking. "You're a good man, Elias Ward. Better than I deserve." "Don't say that. You've brought light back to this house, to Rose, to—" He stopped, but the unspoken word hung between them. "To me." The week that followed passed in a blur of preparation. Mrs. Kowalski finished the dress, a simple but beautiful creation in blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Other women from town stopped by with gifts, preserves, linens, a set of china plates that had belonged to someone's grandmother. They were kind, welcoming, and Clara felt like a fraud accepting every offering. The night before the wedding, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and tried to imagine how it would go. She'd stand beside Elias in that little church, wearing a dress made for a lie, and promise to be his wife. The minister would say, "Do you, Eloise Bennett, take this man?" And she would say yes. She would sign the marriage certificate with a name that wasn't hers. She would become Mrs. Elias Ward under false pretenses. And then what? Live the rest of her life as Eloise? Never tell them the truth? Let them believe the deception until the day she died? The alternative was equally impossible. Tell them now, the night before the wedding, and destroy everything. Watch Rose's face crumple. See the trust in Elias's eyes turn to betrayal. Pack her bag and leave. Because there was no way they'd want her to stay after such a revelation. Clara rose and moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit landscape. Somewhere out there, miles away, her real life was continuing without her. Cordelia was probably pleased to be rid of her. Eloise was probably living her best life without the burden of her plain older sister. Clara Bennett had left no hole when she disappeared. But here, in this place, as Eloise, she mattered. She was wanted, loved even. Was it so wrong to want to keep that? To hold on to this borrowed life with both hands and never let go? A soft knock on her door made Clara turn. "Yes?" "It's me." Rose's whisper was barely audible. "Can I come in?" Clara opened the door to find the child in her nightgown, her favorite wooden horse clutched in one hand. "Can't sleep?" Clara asked. Rose shook her head. "I'm too excited. Tomorrow you'll be my mama for real, forever and ever." The words hit Clara like a blow. Forever and ever. The promise she was making, the future she was stealing. "Come here," Clara said, lifting Rose and carrying her to the bed. They settled under the quilt together, Rose's head on Clara's shoulder. "Will you tell me a story?" Rose asked. "What kind of story?" "A happy one, where nobody leaves." Clara's throat tightened, but she forced herself to speak. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who lived in a beautiful house by the mountains. She was sad because someone she loved very much had gone away. But then one day, someone new came. Someone who had been sad too, in a different place. And they found each other and helped each other not be sad anymore. And they stayed together in that beautiful house and were happy. The end. It was a terrible story, simplistic and rushed, but Rose sighed contentedly. "That's us," she whispered. "You were sad and I was sad, and now we're not sad anymore." "That's right," Clara said, her voice breaking. "Miss Clara?" Clara froze. "What did you call me?" "Clara." That's your real name, isn't it? I heard Papa reading the letter. It said Eloise, but when you came, you looked like a Clara. The world tilted. Rose, It's okay. I like Clara better. It sounds like sunshine. Rose yawned, burrowing closer. Can I call you that sometimes? Just when it's us? Clara couldn't speak. This child, this wise, wounded, wonderful child, had known or guessed and hadn't cared, had accepted her anyway. Yes, Clara finally whispered. When it's just us, you can call me Clara. Okay, Mama Clara. Rose's breathing was already evening out, sleep pulling her under. Love you. I love you too, little Rose. Clara held her through the night, this child who'd seen through her lies and loved her anyway, and felt something inside her break and reform. Maybe the truth didn't have to be an explosion. Maybe it could be a slow reveal, a gentle unfurling. Maybe there was a way to keep this family while also being honest. Or maybe that was just another lie she was telling herself. When morning came, Rose was still asleep in Clara's arms. Clara watched her breathe, memorizing every detail, the curve of her cheek, the fan of her lashes, the way her lips curved slightly upward even in sleep. Whatever happened today, whatever came after, Clara would remember this moment, this child, this love. A soft knock announced Elias. Rose? You in there with, oh. He stood in the doorway, taking in the scene. She came to you in the night? She couldn't sleep. I hope that's all right. More than all right. His expression was soft, almost tender. She used to do that with Sarah, climb into bed when she couldn't sleep, asking for stories. I haven't been able to. He stopped, cleared his throat. It's good. It's really good. Thank you, Eloise. The name felt wrong in her ears, especially after Rose's whispered Clara in the darkness. But Clara just nodded and said, we should probably get her back to her own bed before she wakes up and realizes it's the wedding day. She'll be impossible to settle down. Elias smiled and carefully lifted his daughter, carrying her back to her room with the tenderness of a man who knew how precious and fragile children were. Clara followed, watching the way he tucked Rose in, kissed her forehead, adjusted her blankets with practiced hands. In the hallway, he paused. Are you having any doubts? Last chance to back out, no hard feelings. Clara looked at this man who'd shown her nothing but kindness, who was offering her an escape even on their wedding day. No doubts, she lied. The morning passed in a flurry of preparation. Mrs. Kowalski arrived early to help Clara dress and do her hair. The blue dress fit perfectly, transforming Clara into someone she barely recognized, someone almost pretty, someone who might deserve this life. You look beautiful, Mrs. Kowalski said, her eyes suspiciously bright. Elias is a lucky man. Clara studied her reflection in the small mirror. Not beautiful, not really, but better than she'd ever looked. The dress brought out the color in her eyes. The way Mrs. Kowalski had arranged her hair, pinned up with a few loose curls framing her face, made her look softer, younger. I'm the lucky one, Clara said quietly. Well, you're both lucky then. Best kind of marriage, when both people know they got the better end of the deal. Mrs. Kowalski pinned a small sprig of white flowers into Clara's hair. There, perfect. Let's go get you married. The church was small but beautiful, with wooden pews worn smooth by years of use and windows that let in the morning light. The people of Silver Creek filled the seats, faces curious and kind, all turned toward the back where Clara stood with Mrs. Kowalski. At the front, Elias waited beside Reverend Calhoun. He wore a suit that was clearly his best, a bit outdated but clean and pressed. His hair had been recently cut, and he'd shaved carefully. When he saw Clara, his whole face transformed, and the look in his eyes made her knees weak. Rose stood beside her father in a new dress, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. When she saw Clara, she broke into a smile so wide and pure that several people in the congregation audibly sighed. Ready? Mrs. Kowalski whispered. No. Yes. Clara didn't know anymore. She walked down the aisle. There was no music, no grand processional, just her footsteps on old wooden floors and the weight of dozens of eyes watching her progress. With each step, the lie grew heavier. Each face she passed was someone else she'd deceive. Each smile was a judgment she'd eventually fail. And then she was standing beside Elias, and he was taking her hand, and his touch was warm and steady and real. Reverend Calhoun began to speak. Clara heard words like sacred union and holy matrimony and the sight of God in these witnesses, but they seemed to come from very far away. She was too focused on not fainting, on keeping her breathing even, on not screaming the truth to the rafters. Do you, Elias Ward, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? I do. Elias's voice was strong, certain, and his eyes never left Clara's face. And do you, Eloise Bennett? This was it, the moment, the final chance to stop this, to say, no, wait, my name isn't Eloise, to tell the truth before God and everyone. Take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part. Clara's mouth opened. The truth sat on her tongue, heavy and necessary. She looked at Elias, at the hope in his eyes, at Rose, standing so proudly with her flowers, at the congregation, waiting with benevolent smiles. I do, Clara heard herself say. The words sealed her fate. The lie was now legal, blessed by God, and witnessed by the town. There was no going back. By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Elias, you may kiss your bride. Elias leaned in slowly, giving Clara time to pull away if she wanted. His lips brushed hers, gentle and brief and full of promise, and Clara felt tears slide down her cheeks. Don't cry, Elias whispered against her ear. Everything's all right now. We're family. But that was the problem. They were family built on a lie, and Clara had just sworn before God that she would honor and cherish that lie until death. The congregation erupted in applause. Rose threw her flowers in the air, laughing with pure joy, and Clara smiled through her tears and accepted congratulations from people whose names she couldn't remember, feeling like a fraud at her own wedding. The reception was held at the church hall, a simple affair with food brought by various families and a few fiddles playing cheerful music. Clara moved through it in a daze, accepting well wishes and deflecting questions about her past, about her family, about why no one from St. Louis had come to see her wed. They couldn't make the journey, she said over and over. It's very far. But surely your parents— My mother passed when I was young, my father more recently. I have a stepmother, but we're not close. At least that part was true. Through it all, Rose stayed close to Clara's side, holding her hand, introducing her to the other children as my new mama. Each time the words were a knife and a blessing. Clara was stealing this title, this role, but she'd also earned it in the ways that mattered, through care and patience and love. Late in the afternoon, as the celebration was winding down, Clara found herself alone for a moment on the church steps. She sat heavily, exhausted by the effort of maintaining her performance, and watched the sun begin its descent toward the mountains. Mrs. Ward. Clara looked up to find a woman she didn't recognize, perhaps 40, with graying blonde hair and a face that might have been pretty if it wasn't so pinched. I'm sorry, have we met? Mrs. Beatrice Thompson. I knew Sarah, Elias's first wife. We were quite close. The way she said it made it clear this wasn't a friendly introduction. It's nice to meet you, Clara said carefully. Is it? Mrs. Thompson sat beside Clara uninvited. I'm curious about you, Mrs. Ward. Your letters painted quite a picture, cultured, accomplished, well-bred, but you're not quite what I expected. Clara's spine stiffened. I'm sorry to disappoint. Oh, I didn't say I was disappointed, just surprised. You're quieter than your letters suggested, less polished. Mrs. Thompson's eyes were sharp, assessing. Almost like you're a different person entirely. The accusation hung in the air, barely disguised. Clara's heart hammered, but she kept her voice level. People are often different on paper than in person. I'm sure you've experienced that yourself, Mrs. Thompson. Indeed. And sometimes people are exactly who they claim to be. And sometimes— She let the sentence dangle. Well, time will tell, won't it? I just hope, for Elias's sake, and especially for that poor motherless child, that you are who you say you are. Because this town protects its own, Mrs. Ward. We don't take kindly to those who deceive us." Before Clara could respond, Mrs. Thompson stood and walked away, leaving Clara shaking on the church steps. She knows, Clara thought, or suspects. And if one person suspects, how long before others do? How long before the whole careful construction comes tumbling down? "There you are." Elias emerged from the hall, Rose riding on his shoulders. "We've been looking everywhere. Ready to head home?" "Our home," he corrected himself, smiling. Clara looked at her new husband, at the child who called her mama, at the life she'd stolen and made her own. Mrs. Thompson's warning echoed in her ears. "Yes," Clara said, rising and taking Elias's offered hand. "Let's go home." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, Rose drowsing between them, exhausted from the day's excitement. Clara watched the familiar landscape roll by and tried to imagine years of this, years of living the lie, of never being able to fully relax, of always waiting for discovery. Could she do it? Could she maintain this deception for a lifetime? Did she have any choice? At the house, Elias carried Rose inside and tucked her into bed, still in her party dress. Clara followed, helping to remove the child's shoes and cover her with blankets. "Best day ever," Rose murmured, already half asleep. "Now we're a real family." "We are," Elias agreed, kissing her forehead. "Sleep well, little Rose." Downstairs, alone together for the first time as husband and wife, Clara and Elias stood in the kitchen, suddenly awkward. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "I meant what I said before," Elias began, "about not expecting anything. This doesn't have to change." "I know," Clara interrupted, "and I appreciate that. But, Elias, I need to— There's something I should—" She stopped, the confession stuck in her throat once again. "What is it?" His face was concerned, gentle. "You can tell me anything, Eloise. We're married now, partners. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Partners. The word should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like one more weight added to the mountain of guilt Clara carried. "I'm just tired," she said finally, the coward's way out. "It's been a long day." "Of course. Go on up to bed. He gestured to his cot in the corner. "I'll be down here if you need anything." Clara climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. In her room, the room that was now hers by law and marriage, she carefully removed the blue dress and hung it in the wardrobe. She took out the pins Mrs. Kowalski had so carefully placed in her hair. She washed her face in the basin and changed into her nightgown. And then she sat on the bed and allowed herself to cry. She cried for the life she'd left behind, however awful it had been. She cried for Clara Bennett, who'd ceased to exist the moment she'd said, "I do." She cried for Elias and Rose, who deserved honesty and were getting deception. And she cried for herself, for the impossible situation she'd created, for the love she felt but couldn't fully claim because it was built on lies. Through the floor, she could hear Elias moving around downstairs, the familiar sounds of him banking the fire and preparing for bed. Her husband. The man she'd just vowed to cherish and honor while lying about her very identity. Tomorrow would be the first day of their married life. Tomorrow, Clara would have to figure out how to be a wife, a mother, and a fraud all at once. But tonight, alone in the darkness, she let herself grieve for the honest life she could never have, and prayed for a strength she wasn't sure she possessed. Morning came too soon, announced by the rooster's crow and pale light filtering through the curtains. Clara woke with swollen eyes and a headache that pulsed behind her temples, the physical reminder of last night's tears. For a moment she lay still, disoriented, and then memory crashed back. She was married, legally bound to Elias Ward under a name that wasn't hers. There was no undoing it now. She dressed quickly in one of her plain work dresses and braided her hair with trembling fingers. Downstairs she could already hear movement, Elias starting the day as he always did, even though this day should have been different. Special. Their first morning as husband and wife. When Clara entered the kitchen, she found him at the stove, coffee already brewing. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and his smile was gentle, questioning. "Morning. Did you sleep well?" "Well enough," Clara lied, moving to help with breakfast. You should have woken me. You don't need to do everything yourself anymore. Old habits. He handed her a cup of coffee, their fingers brushing in the exchange. Besides, I figured you needed the rest after yesterday. They worked together in companionable silence, falling into the rhythm they'd developed over the past weeks. Eggs, bacon, biscuits, simple fare, but honest. Rose appeared halfway through, still sleepy-eyed but smiling when she saw them together. "Good morning, Mama," she said, the title now official, and climbed into Clara's lap without hesitation. Clara's heart squeezed. "Good morning, sweetheart. How did you sleep?" "I dreamed about the wedding and about us living here forever and ever." Rose looked up at her with those dark, serious eyes. "We will, won't we? Live here forever?" "That's the plan," Elias said before Clara could answer, setting plates on the table. "This is home now, for all of us." The days that followed settled into a pattern that felt almost normal. Clara ran the household, tended the garden that was beginning to prepare for winter, and spent hours with Rose teaching her letters and numbers. The child was bright, hungry for learning, and Clara found joy in watching her mind unfold. Elias worked the ranch, leaving before dawn and returning at dusk, always with a smile for his daughter and his wife. In the evenings, they gathered by the fire, a family in all visible ways. But Clara felt the weight of her deception growing heavier with each passing day. Every kindness from Elias was another debt she couldn't repay. Every "I love you, Mama" from Rose was another thread binding her to a role she'd stolen. Mrs. Thompson's words haunted her. Time will tell. How much time did Clara have before someone discovered the truth? Before the real Eloise showed up, or before someone from St. Louis passed through and recognized her? The fear was constant, a low hum beneath every moment of happiness. 2 weeks after the wedding, Clara was in the garden, harvesting the last of the vegetables when she heard a wagon approaching. Visitors were rare this far from town, and her first instinct was fear. She stood, brushing dirt from her skirts, and shaded her eyes against the afternoon sun. The wagon that rolled into the yard was unfamiliar, driven by a man Clara didn't recognize. Beside him sat a woman, young, blonde, and even from a distance, clearly uncomfortable with the rough terrain. Clara's blood turned to ice. No, it couldn't be, not yet, not now. But as the wagon drew closer, Clara's worst fears crystallized into reality. The woman's face, though partially hidden by a traveling bonnet, was unmistakable. Golden curls, perfect features, that expression of mild disdain for everything around her. Eloise. The real Eloise had come. Worst fears crystallized into reality. The woman's face, though partially hidden by a traveling bonnet, was unmistakable. Golden curls, perfect features, that expression of mild disdain for everything around her. Eloise. The real Eloise had come. Clara's legs almost gave out. She gripped the garden fence to steady herself, her mind racing. How? Why? Cordelia had been so adamant that Eloise wasn't coming that Clara was being sent instead. What had changed? The wagon stopped, and the driver helped Eloise down. She stood in the yard, looking around with barely concealed disappointment, her fine traveling dress already dusty from the journey. "What a quaint little place," she said, her voice carrying that familiar condescension Claire remembered so well. "Though I must say, it's rather more rustic than the letters suggested." The front door opened and Elias emerged, drawn by the sound of the wagon. He looked confused, his eyes moving from the visitors to Clara, who stood frozen by the garden. "Can I help you folks?" Elias asked, his tone polite but wary. Eloise turned to him and her expression shifted, became calculating, almost predatory. She'd always been able to read people, to adjust her performance to get what she wanted. "Mr. Ward, I presume." "Elias Ward?" Her smile was dazzling. "I'm so sorry to arrive unannounced like this. I'm Eloise Bennett, the real Eloise Bennett." The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of devastation in all directions. Elias went very still, his face draining of color. He looked at the woman in front of him, then at Clara by the garden, then back again. "I don't understand," he said slowly. "Of course you don't, you poor man." Eloise's voice dripped with sympathy. "You've been terribly deceived. That woman there," she gestured dismissively at Clara, "is not Eloise Bennett. She's Clara Bennett, my older sister, a spinster and a liar. who apparently decided to steal my correspondence and my future. Clara felt the world tilting. She wanted to run, to disappear, but her feet were rooted to the earth. All she could do was watch as everything she'd built came crashing down. Clara? Elias's voice was barely audible, but Clara heard the hurt in it, the betrayal. He took a step toward her. Is this true? Before Clara could answer, though what could she possibly say, the door burst open again and Rose ran out, heading straight for Clara as she always did. Mama, come see what I drew. It's... She stopped, sensing the tension in the air, her small face scrunched with confusion. What's wrong? Rose, go back inside, Elias said, his voice tight. But... Now, Rose. The child looked between her father and Clara, her eyes filling with tears at the harsh tone. Clara wanted to comfort her, to explain, but she had no right. Not anymore. Mrs. Kowalski appeared in the doorway. She'd been helping with the washing and gently guided Rose back inside. In the sudden silence, Eloise laughed. It was a cruel sound, one Clara knew well from years of sisterly torment. Oh my! And she's been playing mother to your daughter? This gets better and better. Tell me, Mr. Ward, did she claim to have all my accomplishments too? My musical abilities? My refinement? I bet she struggled, didn't she? Poor Clara was never good at pretending to be something she's not. Well, until now, apparently. Why are you here? Clara finally found her voice, though it came out hoarse. Cordelia said you weren't coming. She said... Cordelia said a lot of things. Eloise examined her gloves with studied disinterest. But then dear Richard Worthington's business failed, and suddenly his proposal wasn't quite so appealing. Mother suggested I might want to reconsider my Western options after all. Imagine my surprise when I arrived in St. Louis to find you'd already left, using my name. The sheer audacity of it, Clara. I almost admire you. The pieces fell into place. Eloise had been engaged, or nearly so, to a wealthy man in St. Louis. Cordelia had sent Clara away to clear the path for that advantageous match. But when the match fell through, Eloise decided she wanted the Colorado rancher after all. You need to leave. Clara's voice was stronger now, though she was shaking. You can't just show up and... Can I? Eloise's smile was sharp. Mr. Ward, I have all the letters here. The originals in my handwriting. I can prove I'm who I say I am. Can she? Can Clara prove she's Eloise Bennett? Because I'm quite certain the marriage certificate says Eloise, doesn't it? Which means your marriage is a fraud, built on a lie. Probably not even legal. Elias looked like he'd been struck. He stared at Clara, and she could see him processing everything, every moment, every conversation, every tenderness they'd shared, all of it now tainted by deception. Elias, please, Clara started toward him, but he held up a hand. Don't. Just don't. He turned to Eloise. Miss Bennett, I think you and your driver should come inside. We need to sort this out properly. Of course. Though I must say, the accommodations look rather cramped. I do hope there's room for me to stay while we settle this unfortunate situation. Clara felt the ground disappearing beneath her feet. This was it. The reckoning she'd been dreading, and it was somehow worse than she'd imagined. Not a gradual revelation, but a brutal unmasking in front of Elias, with the real Eloise standing there in all her golden perfection, claiming the life Clara had borrowed. Inside the house, the atmosphere was suffocating. Mrs. Kowalski had taken Rose upstairs, and Clara could hear the child crying, confused and frightened by the tension. The sound tore at Clara's heart. Eloise settled herself at the table like she already owned the place, while her driver, introduced as Mr. Grimsby, hired for the journey, stood awkwardly by the door. Elias remained standing, his arms crossed, his face a mask of controlled emotion. Let me see the letters, he said to Eloise. She produced them from her bag with a flourish, a stack of papers in her elegant handwriting. Clara recognized them instantly. She'd been forced to copy them, word for word, while Cordelia dictated. But these were the originals, written in Eloise's hand. Elias read through them slowly, his expression growing more pained with each page. When he finally looked up, his eyes found Clara's. You copied these. Sent them as if you'd written them yourself. It wasn't a question, but Clara nodded anyway. Yes. Why? The single word held a universe of hurt. I didn't have a choice. Cordelia, my stepmother, she forced me onto the coach. You asked for Eloise, and she sent me instead because Eloise had other prospects. I tried to tell you that first day, but I was so afraid. And then Rose, Clara's voice broke. I know there's no excuse. I know what I did was wrong. But everything after that first lie was real. The way I cared for Rose, the way I... She couldn't say it. Couldn't claim love when she'd betrayed trust so thoroughly. This is all very touching, Eloise interrupted, but it doesn't change the facts. Clara deceived you, Mr. Ward. She stole my identity, my correspondence, my future. And now here I am, the woman you actually proposed to, ready to honor the commitment you thought you were making. Elias looked at Eloise for a long moment, and Clara saw him taking in the golden hair, the perfect features, the refinement that had been promised in the letters. This was what he'd expected when he'd sent for a bride. This was what he thought he was getting. The letters mentioned accomplishments, Elias said slowly. Musical ability, in particular. Eloise brightened. Oh yes, I'm quite accomplished at the piano. I studied for years with a master teacher in St. Louis. I can play anything, Mozart, Beethoven, even some Chopin. Though I suppose you don't have a piano out here in the wilderness. What about children? Your letter said you loved children, that you'd taught at a Sunday school. Well, yes. I mean, I helped occasionally, with the older children, of course. The little ones can be so... She waved her hand vaguely. Sticky. Clara watched Elias's face as he processed this. She saw the moment something shifted in his expression. Not forgiveness, but recognition. And you mentioned your mother's death. How old were you when she passed? Eloise hesitated just a fraction of a second. 12. No, 13. It was terribly tragic. The letters said you were 8. Did they? Well, it was so long ago the details blur. Clara was 8, Elias said quietly, when her mother died. Weren't you, Clara? Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The letters were about Clara, Elias continued, his voice growing stronger. The experiences, the losses, the longing for a fresh start, those were Clara's truths. You just wrote them down. Eloise's perfect composure cracked slightly. Cordelia told me what to write. We thought it would make a better story, more sympathetic. So you lied too. Elias's laugh was bitter. The woman I thought I was corresponding with never existed. She was a fiction created by a stepmother and written in one sister's hand while actually living in another sister's heart. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara felt tears streaming down her face, but made no move to wipe them away. What did it matter now? Here's what's going to happen, Elias said finally, his voice hard. Mr. Grimsby, I'll pay you to take Miss Bennet back to town. She can stay at the hotel until the next coach east. You can't be serious. Eloise stood, her face flushing. I'm Eloise Bennet. I'm the one you sent for. She's the imposter. You're the one who wrote letters full of someone else's pain and called it your own. That makes you as much a liar as anyone here. Elias's jaw was tight. This may be the wilderness to you, Miss Bennet, but it's my home, and I get to choose who stays in it. But the marriage, it's not legal. You married the wrong woman. Then I'll deal with that. But I won't deal with you. Please leave my property. Eloise stared at him in disbelief, then at Clara with pure venom. You think you've won? You think he'll actually keep you after this? He's just trying to protect his pride. But you stole everything from me. And when he realizes what you really are, a desperate, plain, unwanted liar, he'll throw you out just like Cordelia did. The words hit like physical blows. But before Clara could respond, a small voice came from the stairs. Don't talk to my mama like that. Everyone turned to see Rose standing there, her face tear-stained but her expression fierce. Mrs. Kowalski stood behind her, one hand on the child's shoulder, but Rose had clearly broken away. She's not your mother, you stupid child, Eloise snapped. She's nobody. She's what? That's enough. Elias's voice cracked like a whip. Mr. Grimsby, get her out of here, now. The driver, who'd been watching the whole scene with growing discomfort, moved quickly to Eloise's side. Ma'am, we should go. Eloise jerked away from him. her composure completely shattered now. You'll regret this, Elias Ward. All of you will regret this. When you're stuck with her, with plain, pathetic Clara, you'll wish you'd chosen differently. I already have regrets, Elias said quietly. But she's not one of them. You are. As Mr. Grimsby managed to herd Eloise toward the door, she turned back one last time. I'll contest the marriage. I'll tell everyone what she did. This whole town will know you married a fraud. Then they'll know, Elias said. Now get out of my house. The door slammed behind them, and moments later the wagon rattled out of the yard. In the sudden silence, no one moved. Clara stood frozen, waiting for Elias to turn his anger on her now that Eloise was gone. She deserved it. Deserved to be thrown out, to lose everything she'd gained through deception. But when Elias finally spoke, he wasn't talking to her. He was looking at Rose. Come here, little Rose. Rose ran to him, and he scooped her up, holding her tight. That lady was mean, Rose whispered against his neck. She's not Mama. Mama is Mama. I know, sweetheart, I know. Elias kissed her hair, then finally looked at Clara. The expression on his face was complex. Hurt, anger, confusion, but also something else, something that might have been understanding. Mrs. Kowalski, would you take Rose outside for a bit? Show her the new calf in the barn? Of course. Mrs. Kowalski took Rose's hand. Come on, love. Let's give your parents some time to talk. But now, Rose. When they were alone, Elias set Rose down and moved to the window, his back to Clara. For a long moment, he just stood there silent, and Clara thought she might shatter from the tension. I should have told you, she said finally, her voice breaking. That first day, that first moment, I should have been honest. I meant to. I wanted to. But I was so scared, and then I met Rose, and I fell in love with her. With both of you. With this life. And I was selfish, and I kept the lie going because I couldn't bear to lose it. Clara, he said, testing the name. Your real name is Clara. Clara Bennett, 23 years old, plain and unwanted and shipped off by my stepmother to a life meant for someone else. Everything in those letters, the losses, the loneliness, the hope for something better, that was mine. My pain, my past, my words. Eloise just wrote them down because Cordelia told her to. And the piano, the accomplishments? I can't play a note. I can barely carry a tune. I can sew and cook and keep house because I had to, not because I was trained in the refined arts. I'm nobody special, Elias. I'm just me. And I'm so sorry. He turned then, and Clara saw tears on his face. You lied to me. From the very first moment, you lied. Yes. You let me marry you under false pretenses. Yes. You built our entire relationship on a foundation of deception. Yes, Clara was sobbing now. Yes, I did all of that, and I know you can't forgive me. I know you want me gone. I'll pack my things. I'll leave tonight if you want. Just please don't let Rose think she did something wrong. Please tell her that I loved her, that every moment with her was real. Stop. Elias crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed Clara's shoulders, not roughly but firmly. Just stop talking and listen to me. Clara tried to focus through her tears. What you did was wrong, Elias said, his voice rough. It was deceitful and selfish, and it hurt me. It hurts me. Standing here right now knowing that every time I called you Eloise, I was saying the wrong name. It hurts. I know, I'm so sorry. But he squeezed her shoulders gently. But Clara, do you know what else I saw today? I saw the woman my daughter ran to when she was scared. I saw the woman who defended her, who she called Mama without hesitation. I saw the woman who's made this house a home, who's brought light back into our lives. And that woman, whether her name is Eloise or Clara, that woman is the one I've been falling in love with. Clara's breath caught. What? I'm angry. I'm hurt. I feel like an idiot for not seeing through it. But Clara, he said her name deliberately, claiming it. I don't want you to leave. Rose doesn't want you to leave. We want you to stay. The real you. Not Eloise's shadow. You. But the marriage. Eloise was right. It might not be legal. I signed the wrong name. Then we'll get married again. Properly, this time, with your real name. We'll go to the minister tomorrow and explain everything and do it right. He cupped her face in his hands, wiping away tears with his thumbs. If you want to. If you want to be Clara Ward instead of living as Eloise. Clara couldn't believe what she was hearing. You do that? After everything I did, you'd still want... I want you. The woman who sang Rose to sleep and fixed my house and burned dinner that first week because she was nervous. The woman who sits by the creek and looks like she's carrying the weight of the world. Clara. I want Clara. I don't deserve you, Clara whispered. Maybe not, but you're what we need. You're what Rose needs, and if I'm honest, his voice broke. You're what I need too. These past weeks, watching you with my daughter, coming home to you, sitting by the fire. Clara, I haven't been this happy since Sarah died. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you. Clara threw her arms around him and sobbed into his chest, years of fear and guilt and loneliness pouring out. And Elias held her, his own tears falling into her hair, two broken people clinging to each other, and the unexpected love they'd found. I love you, Clara said between sobs. I love you so much, and I'm so sorry I hurt you. I know you do. He pulled back just enough to look at her face. We'll figure this out, together, as partners, as husband and wife. The real ones this time. A sound from the doorway made them both turn. Rose stood there, having escaped Mrs. Kowalski's supervision, her face hopeful. Are you leaving, Mama? Clara knelt down, and Rose ran into her arms. No, sweetheart, I'm staying, if you'll still have me. Forever and ever? Forever and ever, Clara promised, and this time the vow was real. Rose pulled back and looked seriously at her father. Papa, her name is Clara, not Eloise. I knew all along. Elias raised his eyebrows. Did you now? She looked like a Clara. Eloise is a fancy name for fancy ladies. Clara is a name for mamas who catch fish and tell good stories and don't mind when you're sad. Clara laughed through her tears. How did you get so wise, little Rose? God made me smart, Rose said matter-of-factly, and he sent you. I prayed and he sent you. Even if you came with the wrong name, you're still the answer to my prayer. The simple faith of a child, that God could work through human mistakes, that love could transcend deception, hit Clara like a revelation. Maybe she hadn't stolen this life. Maybe, somehow, she was meant to be here all along. Maybe the lie had been the path to a truth none of them could have found any other way. That evening, after Rose had gone to bed, after being thoroughly reassured that Clara wasn't going anywhere, Clara and Elias sat by the fire, closer than they'd ever sat before. The cot in the corner suddenly seemed ridiculous, a relic of the polite distance they'd maintained. You should sleep upstairs, Clara said quietly, in a real bed. I know you said you'd wait until I was ready, but... Clara, he took her hand. We need time, both of us, to rebuild trust, to get to know each other as who we really are. I meant what I said about not rushing you. But we've been married for weeks, and tomorrow we'll explain to the minister that the marriage needs to be redone with the correct name, which means technically, he smiled slightly. We're starting over, fresh. So let's do it right this time, courtship and all. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. Have I ever told you that you're a remarkably good man, Elias Ward? Once or twice, though I suspect you're biased. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders. There's something I need to ask you, though, about what happened in St. Louis. Your stepmother, did she hurt you? Those first weeks I saw bruises sometimes, the way you flinched at loud noises. Clara went still. She thought she'd hidden it better. Clara, if someone hurt you, it doesn't matter now, that life is over. It matters to me. His voice was gentle but insistent. You're my wife. If someone harmed you... Cordelia was cruel. She believed in discipline, in breaking what she called willfulness. My father, before he died, he tried to protect me, but he was ill, and after he was gone... Clara took a shaky breath. She never hurt Eloise. Only me. Because I was useful. I could work, could manage the house, could be the perfect servant. But I was never good enough. Never pretty enough, or refined enough, or worthy of anything better. Elias's arm tightened around her. She was wrong. You're worth everything. I didn't believe that. Not until I came here. Not until Rose looked at me like I mattered, and you treated me like I was worth kindness. You gave me something I'd never had before, hope. That's why I couldn't tell the truth. I was terrified you'd send me back, and I couldn't. Her voice broke. I couldn't go back to being nothing. You were never nothing, and you're never going back there. I promise you that, Clara. Whatever happens, you have a home here, with us. Always. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, the mountain wind sang through the pines, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called. The sounds of their life together, now claimed under true names and honest hearts. When Clara finally climbed the stairs to her room, Elias stopped her with a gentle hand on her wrist. One more thing. Tomorrow, when we go to town, people will talk. Mrs. Thompson will have a field day. There will be gossip, judgment, maybe worse. Are you prepared for that? Clara thought about it honestly. No, but I'm prepared to face it. With you beside me, I can face anything. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Then we'll face it together. Good night, Clara Bennett. Good night, Elias. She said her real name for the first time in this house, and it felt like coming home. In her room, Clara changed into her nightgown and brushed out her hair, seeing herself truly for the first time in weeks. Not Eloise's shadow, just Clara. Plain, ordinary Clara who'd somehow found an extraordinary love in the most unlikely place. She thought about Eloise, probably fuming in some hotel room in Silver Creek, convinced she'd been cheated out of what was rightfully hers. But Eloise didn't understand, had never understood, that love couldn't be claimed like property. It had to be earned, nurtured, built through patience and presence and 1,000 small acts of care. Clara had earned this. Not through deception, but through everything that came after, through loving a wounded child back to laughter, through making a house into a home, through showing up day after day and choosing to stay even when it would have been easier to run. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The minister's questions, the town's judgment, the legal complications of a marriage performed under the wrong name. But Clara wasn't afraid anymore. She had Elias's love, Rose's trust, and most importantly, she had her own name back. She was Clara Ward, or she would be once they made it official. And that was more than enough. Through the thin wall, she could hear Rose talking in her sleep, a happy murmur of words Clara couldn't quite make out. Downstairs, Elias's footsteps moved across the floor, the familiar rhythm of him banking the fire and securing the doors for the night. The sounds of family, the sounds of home, the sounds of a life Clara had borrowed but was now being offered freely, with full knowledge of who she really was. She climbed into bed and pulled the quilt, made by Elias's first wife, another woman who'd loved this family, up to her chin. Sarah's ghost didn't feel threatening anymore. Instead, Clara felt a kinship with her, a gratitude for the foundation of love she'd laid that made this new love possible. Thank you, Clara whispered into the darkness, not sure if she was talking to Sarah or to God or to the universe itself. Thank you for this chance. I won't waste it. I promise. And with that vow, one she had the right to make, in her own name, with her own heart, Clara Bennett closed her eyes and slept peacefully for the first time since she'd boarded that westbound coach all those weeks ago. The morning sun found Clara already awake, staring at the ceiling and rehearsing what she would say to Reverend Calhoun. How did one explain that their entire marriage was built on a lie? That the woman who'd stood before God and the congregation wasn't who she claimed to be? The weight of the coming day pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Clara, you awake? Elias's voice, saying her real name, sent a wave of emotion through her. Yes, come in. He opened the door carefully, carrying a cup of coffee. The gesture was so simple, so domestic, but it made Clara's eyes sting with tears. He sat on the edge of her bed, and they shared the coffee in silence, passing the cup back and forth. I didn't sleep much, Elias admitted. Kept thinking about what we need to say, how to explain it all. I'm scared. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. What if the minister refuses to marry us again? What if the whole town turns against us? Then we'll deal with it. Together. He took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. But Clara, whatever happens today, I need you to know something. I don't regret you. Not for a single moment. Even knowing about the lie, I don't regret that you came here. How can you say that? I deceived you. I made you look like a fool. You made me feel alive again. His grip tightened. For 2 years, I was just going through motions, surviving, not living. Rose was slipping away from me, becoming more silent every day. And then you arrived, and everything changed. You brought color back to our world. That's worth more than perfect honesty from the start. But trust can be rebuilt, will be rebuilt. He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles gently. I'm choosing to trust you, Clara, starting right now. Can you trust me to mean what I say? Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. They finished the coffee, and then Elias left her to dress, while he went to help Rose prepare for the day. Clara chose her plainest dress. No pretense, no attempt to be anything other than what she was. If the town was going to judge her, let them judge the truth. Downstairs, Rose was eating breakfast with unusual quiet, her eyes moving between Clara and her father with worried uncertainty. Are we going to town? She asked. Mrs. Kowalski said we might go to town today. We are, Elias confirmed. Your mama and I have some business with Reverend Calhoun. Because of the mean lady? Rose's face scrunched with concern. Is she going to make Mama leave? Clara knelt beside Rose's chair. No one's making me leave, sweetheart, but your papa and I need to fix something important. Something we should have fixed a long time ago. Your name, Rose said matter-of-factly. You need to tell everyone your real name is Clara. That's right, and some people might be upset about that. They might say unkind things. Rose's small jaw set stubbornly. Then I'll tell them they're wrong. You're the best mama no matter what your name is. The simple loyalty of this child undid Clara completely. She pulled Rose into a fierce hug, breathing in the scent of soap and sunshine that always clung to her. I love you so much, Rose Ward. I love you too, Mama Clara. The ride into Silver Creek felt both too long and too short. Clara sat between Elias and Rose on the wagon seat, trying to memorize every detail of the landscape in case this was the last time she'd see it as a free woman. What if the marriage wasn't just invalid but actually criminal? Could she be arrested for fraud? The possibilities spiraled in her mind until Elias's hand found hers and squeezed. Breathe, he murmured. Just breathe. The town looked the same as always, the general store with its faded awning, the saloon that never seemed to close, the church with its white steeple pointing toward heaven like an accusatory finger. But Clara felt every eye on them as they rolled down the main street. Word had spread, as it always did in small towns. She could see it in the way conversations stopped mid-sentence, in the turned heads and whispered exchanges. Mrs. Thompson stood outside the mercantile, her expression triumphant. Well, well, I knew something wasn't right about that girl. Didn't I say so, Martha? She addressed the woman beside her loudly enough for Clara to hear. I told you she wasn't what she claimed to be. Elias's jaw tightened, but he kept the wagon moving toward the church. They found Reverend Calhoun in his small office attached to the building, reviewing what looked like Sunday's sermon. He looked up as they entered, and Clara saw the knowledge already in his eyes. He knew. Someone had told him. Elias. Mrs. Ward. He paused on the name. Or should I call you something else? Clara, she said quietly. My name is Clara Bennett. The minister set down his pen and folded his hands on the desk. He was an older man, perhaps 60, with kind eyes that had seen too much of human nature to be easily shocked, but he looked disappointed, which was somehow worse than anger. I received an interesting visitor yesterday evening, he said, a Miss Eloise Bennett claiming to be the rightful bride. She had quite a story to tell about deception and stolen identities. It's true, Clara said before Elias could speak. I lied about who I was. I took my sister's name and pretended to be her. Everything Miss Bennett told you was true. Clara, Elias started, but she shook her head. No, I need to own this. I need to tell the truth. She looked directly at Reverend Calhoun. I was forced onto that stagecoach by my stepmother. The letters you helped Elias read, those were written in my sister's hand, but the experiences described were mine. My losses, my hopes. Eloise never had any intention of coming here, but when I arrived, I was so desperate, so afraid of being sent back to St. Louis that I lied. I said I was Eloise when I'm really Clara. And you maintained this lie through courtship and marriage, the minister said. You stood before God and this congregation and gave false testimony. Yes, sir, I did. Do you understand the seriousness of what you've done? Marriage is a sacred covenant. You've made a mockery of it. The words hit like blows, but Clara forced herself to stay upright. I understand, Reverend, and I'm prepared to face whatever consequences you deem appropriate. The consequences? Reverend Calhoun's voice rose slightly. Young woman, you may have committed fraud. The marriage may be invalid. Elias may have grounds to have it annulled immediately. Now wait just a minute. Elias stepped forward, his hand on Clara's shoulder. Before you start talking about annulments, you need to hear the whole story. I've heard quite enough. You've heard Eloise's version and Clara's confession, but you haven't heard mine. Elias's voice was firm, respectful, but unyielding. Yes, Clara lied about her name. Yes, that was wrong, but Reverend, I need you to understand something. The woman I fell in love with, the woman I married, wasn't a name on paper. It was the person who sang my daughter to sleep, who made my house a home, who brought joy back into our lives after 2 years of grief. That doesn't excuse. I'm not asking you to excuse it. I'm asking you to help us fix it. Elias's hand tightened on Clara's shoulder. We want to get married again, properly, with Clara's real name, in front of the whole town if necessary, so there's no question about the legitimacy of our union. Reverend Calhoun leaned back in his chair, studying them both. You're willing to marry her, even now, knowing she deceived you? I'm willing to marry Clara Bennett, yes, because that's who she's always been. The name was wrong, but everything else was real. The minister's gaze shifted to Rose, who'd been sitting quietly in a corner chair, clutching her wooden horse. And what about the child? Did you consider what this deception would do to her? Rose stood up, her small frame radiating unexpected courage. Sir? Reverend Calhoun, sir? Yes, child? My mama's name is Clara. I knew that. God told me in my prayers. And he sent her here because he knew she was the right one, even if she came with the wrong name stuck on her. Rose walked over and took Clara's hand. Mama made me happy again. She made Papa smile again. Isn't that what God wants? For people to be happy and love each other? The simple theology from a 6-year-old's mouth seemed to reach Reverend Calhoun in a way adult arguments hadn't. His stern expression softened slightly. Out of the mouths of babes, he murmured. Then, more loudly, Miss Bennett, Miss Clara Bennett, do you love this man and this child? With everything I am, Clara said, her voice breaking. I know I don't deserve them. I know what I did was wrong, but I love them more than I've ever loved anything in my life. And are you prepared to live as Clara Ward, to claim your true identity and face whatever judgment comes from this community? Yes, sir, if they'll have me. Reverend Calhoun was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the desk. Finally, he sighed. This is highly irregular. I should refuse. The proper thing would be to annul the marriage and send you packing back to wherever you came from. Clara's heart sank, but then the minister continued. However, I've been performing marriages for 30 years, and I've learned that the letter of the law matters less than the spirit of it. Marriage is about commitment, partnership, love. And despite the deception, I believe those things exist between you two. He looked at Elias. You're certain about this? Once we remarry you properly, there's no backing out because you've changed your mind. I'm certain, Elias said without hesitation. Then we'll do it. This Sunday, after the regular service, in front of the entire congregation. No hiding, no secrecy. Everyone will know exactly what happened and exactly who's getting married. If you can face that, if you can stand before this community and claim each other honestly, then I'll bless your union. Relief flooded through Clara so powerfully, she swayed. Elias steadied her, his arm around her waist. Thank you, Reverend, Clara managed. Thank you for giving us this chance. Don't thank me yet. You have to face the congregation first. And I can tell you right now, some of them won't be happy about this. Mrs. Thompson, in particular, has been quite vocal about her disapproval. Let her disapprove, Elias said firmly. We'll face it together. As they left the church, Clara felt like she could breathe fully for the first time in weeks. The truth was out. The worst had happened, and they'd survived it. Now they just had to survive Sunday. But first they had to survive the walk back to the wagon through a town that knew their secret. Mrs. Thompson was waiting, and she wasn't alone. A small group of women had gathered, their expressions ranging from curious to condemning. As Clara and Elias approached with Rose between them, Mrs. Thompson stepped forward. So it's true then, you're an imposter, a fraud who stole another woman's identity. Clara felt Rose's hand tighten in hers, felt Elias tense beside her, but she forced herself to meet Mrs. Thompson's gaze directly. It's true. I lied about my name. I pretended to be my sister. It was wrong, and I'm sorry for the deception. Sorry? Mrs. Thompson's laugh was harsh. You trapped a good man into marriage under false pretenses, and you think sorry covers it? I don't expect it to cover anything, Clara said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. I expect to spend the rest of my life making it right, proving that I'm worthy of the second chance I've been given. Second chance? You should be run out of town on a rail. That's enough, Beatrice. The new voice came from Mrs. Kowalski, who'd pushed through the small crowd. She stood beside Clara, her expression fierce. This girl made a mistake, yes, but I've watched her these past weeks. I've seen her with Rose, seen her transform that house into a home. Whatever name she used, the woman herself is good. She's a liar, Mrs. Thompson insisted. And you've never lied? Never bent the truth to protect yourself or get something you wanted? Mrs. Kowalski's voice was sharp. We're all sinners, Beatrice. The only difference is some of us remember that before we start casting stones. Another woman spoke up, Martha Henderson from the general store. I have to say, I've always found Mrs. Ward, or Miss Bennett, or whatever her name is, I found her to be quite kind. Last week she helped me with my shopping when I had all 3 children with me, and she didn't have to do that. That doesn't excuse— No, it doesn't excuse the lie, Martha interrupted. But it speaks to her character, to who she really is, underneath the wrong name. The crowd was beginning to murmur, opinions dividing. Clara could see some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads in disgust. The town was splitting over her, and the weight of that responsibility was crushing. Please, Clara said, raising her voice to be heard, please don't fight over this. Mrs. Thompson is right. I lied, and that was wrong. If you want to shun me, to refuse to speak to me, I'll understand. But please don't let this divide the community. Don't let my mistake damage the good relationships you've all built here. How noble, Mrs. Thompson sneered. Playing the martyr now? No, I'm just trying to do what I should have done from the beginning. Tell the truth and accept the consequences. Clara looked around at the gathered faces. My name is Clara Bennett. I'm 23 years old, and I came west under false pretenses because I was desperate and afraid. I fell in love with a good man and his daughter, and I made the selfish choice to keep lying rather than risk losing them. That was wrong. I'm sorry, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the forgiveness I've been given. The honesty in her words seemed to take the wind out of Mrs. Thompson's sails. The older woman opened her mouth, closed it, then turned on her heel and stalked away. A few other women followed her, but more stayed behind. Mrs. Kowalski patted Clara's shoulder. That was well said, child. Now come on, let's get you all home before there's more drama. But before they could move, old Mr. Chen from the laundry approached. He was a small man, weathered by years of hard work, and he rarely spoke to anyone. When he did, people listened. Miss Bennett, he said, his accent thick but his words clear. I come to America with false papers. Say I am merchant, but really I am worker. I lie because I want better life. Many people here, they lie to get here, to start over. You not first, you not last. What matters is what you do after the lie. How you live. How you treat people. He nodded once sharply. You treat people good. That matters more. The simple wisdom coming from someone who'd survived his own deceptions brought fresh tears to Clara's eyes. "Thank you, Mr.
Chen. That's very kind." He nodded again and walked away, and his words seemed to shift something in the remaining crowd.
People began to disperse, some still whispering, but the hostile energy dissipating. By the time Clara, Elias, and Rose reached their wagon, most of the townspeople had returned to their business. "Well," Elias said as they climbed onto the seat, "that could have gone worse."
"Could it?"
Clara felt drained, wrung out like laundry left too long in the sun. "You're still here. You're still with us. That's what matters." He clicked to the horses, and they began the journey home. Rose leaned against Clara's side. "Mama, why was that lady so mean?" Clara thought about how to answer, how to explain human cruelty to a child who'd already experienced too much loss. "Some people," she said carefully, "get scared when things aren't what they expected. And when they're scared, sometimes they get angry. Mrs. Thompson isn't really mad at me. She's mad at the idea that people can change, that mistakes can be forgiven. Because if she accepts that, she has to look at her own mistakes, and that's scary." "That's a very generous interpretation," Elias murmured. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just trying to understand how anyone can carry that much anger around. It must be exhausting." The ranch appeared in the distance, and Clara felt a surge of love for the simple buildings, the mountains rising behind them, the creek bubbling through the property. This was home, her home, and she was going to fight to keep it. Over the next few days, life settled into an uneasy rhythm. Elias worked the ranch, Clara managed the household, and Rose went about her days with the resilience of childhood. But there was a tension underneath everything, a waiting. Sunday was coming, and with it, the public reckoning. Clara found herself unable to sleep much. She'd lie awake at night, imagining every possible scenario. What if the congregation refused to witness the new ceremony? What if Reverend Calhoun changed his mind? What if Eloise returned with legal papers, with proof that Clara had committed fraud? On Thursday evening, 3 days before the ceremony, Clara was sitting on the porch steps watching the sunset when Elias joined her. He'd been quiet since they returned from town, and Clara worried that he was having second thoughts. "You've been avoiding me," she said softly. "Not avoiding, thinking." He sat beside her, their shoulders touching. "Clara, I need to know something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Her stomach clenched. "All right. Do you love me? Or do you love the safety I represent? The escape from your old life?" The question hung between them, painful and necessary. Clara turned to face him fully. "When I first arrived, I don't know if I could tell the difference," she admitted. "You represented safety, yes, a way out of a life that was slowly killing me. But Elias, somewhere between that first awkward dinner and now, it became about you, about the man who treats his daughter with such tenderness, about the way you never once raised your voice to me, even when you had every right to be angry, about how you make me feel like I matter, like I'm worth something." She took his hand, threading their fingers together. "I love you, Elias Ward. Not for what you can give me or protect me from, but for who you are. For your kindness and your strength, and the way you see the best in people even when they don't deserve it. I love that you chose to forgive me when you could have thrown me out. I love that you're willing to stand in front of the whole town and marry me again, publicly claiming someone most people think isn't worth claiming." Elias was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I needed to hear that. Needed to know it wasn't just about escape. It's about love. Real love. The kind I didn't even know existed until I found it here, with you and Rose." He pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. Inside, they could hear Rose singing to herself, some nonsense tune about horses and mountains. The sound was pure joy. "She's come so far," Elias said. "My little Rose. She barely spoke for 2 years, and now listen to her. She was just waiting for it to feel safe again, for the world to prove it wouldn't hurt her if she opened up. Like you," Elias observed. "You were both waiting for safety. And you gave it to us. You gave us a home." Friday brought unexpected visitors. Clara was hanging laundry when she heard a wagon approaching and felt the familiar spike of anxiety. But it was Mrs. Kowalski, and with her were Martha Henderson and two other women from town, Sarah Chen, Mr. Chen's daughter-in-law, and young Emily Callahan. "We've come to help you prepare," Mrs. Kowalski announced, climbing down from the wagon with a basket. No bride should face her wedding day alone, and that includes the second time around. Clara was stunned. "You don't have to." "We know we don't have to," Martha interrupted. "We want to. Whatever Mrs. Thompson and her cronies think, there are plenty of us who believe in second chances." They spent the day together, and Clara felt something shift inside her. These women, they knew the truth, knew what she'd done, and they'd chosen to stand by her anyway. They helped her alter the blue dress she'd worn to the first wedding, making it fresh and new. They taught her how to style her hair in a way that was fashionable but not too elaborate. They shared stories about their own mistakes, their own moments of deception or weakness. "I told my husband I could cook when we were courting," Emily confessed with a laugh. "Burned everything I touched for the first 3 months of marriage. He finally admitted he'd been sneaking sandwiches at the saloon just to survive." "I may have exaggerated my family's financial situation," Sarah Chen added quietly. "Made it sound like we were more prosperous than we were. I was so afraid he'd reject me if he knew how poor we really were." The confessions continued, each woman offering up her own imperfections like gifts. By the end of the day, Clara felt less like a pariah and more like a member of a community of flawed, striving, human women, all trying to build lives worth living. Saturday evening, Elias asked Clara to walk with him to the creek. Rose was spending the night with Mrs. Kowalski. "So you two can have some privacy before the big day," she'd said with a knowing wink. And the house felt strange and empty without the child's presence. They sat on the bank where Clara had first talked with Rose about memories and feelings, where she'd felt the first real stirrings of belonging. The water bubbled over the stones, and the last light of day filtered through the aspen leaves overhead. "I'm nervous about tomorrow," Clara admitted. "Me too." Elias picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his hands. "Not about marrying you, I'm certain about that, but about facing everyone, about what they'll say." "We could leave," Clara said suddenly. "Start over somewhere no one knows us. Somewhere you don't have to defend your choice to marry someone like me." "Someone like you?" Elias set down the stone and took her face in his hands. "Clara, you're brave and kind and stronger than you know. Yes, you made a mistake, but you owned it. You stood in front of the whole town and told the truth, even knowing it could cost you everything. That takes courage most people don't have. Or stupidity. No, courage." He leaned forward and kissed her, deeper than the chaste kiss at their first wedding. This kiss was a claim, a promise, a statement of intent. When he pulled back, both of them were breathing hard. "Tomorrow, I'm going to marry you in front of God and everyone. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that you deserve to be loved." Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I don't know what I did to deserve you. You showed up. You stayed. You loved my daughter when she needed it most. You loved me when I didn't even realize how lonely I'd been." He kissed her again, softer this time. "That's more than enough." They sat by the creek until the stars came out, talking about their future, about the life they'd build together, honestly this time, without lies or pretense, about the children they might have, brothers and sisters for Rose, about growing old together in this place they both loved. "I want to expand the ranch," Elias said. "Maybe get some sheep in addition to the cattle. And I've been thinking about that leak in the roof. I should probably tear the whole thing off and rebuild it properly before winter." "We could paint the shutters," Clara added. "Maybe add some flower boxes under the windows. And I'd like to start a real vegetable garden next spring, not just the scraggly patch we have now." They were planning a future, and for the first time, Clara let herself believe in it completely. This wasn't a borrowed life anymore. This was hers, claimed through truth and trial and the terrifying vulnerability of being fully known and still chosen. When they finally walked back to the house, the moon was high and bright, turning the landscape silver. At the door, Elias paused. "I should sleep out in the barn tonight. Keep things proper until after the ceremony." Clara caught his hand. "Or you could stay. In the house, I mean. In a real bed instead of that terrible cot." "Clara, I'm not saying I know we're waiting until after we're properly married. But you don't have to exile yourself to the barn. Take the guest room, or even my room. I'll sleep in Rose's bed tonight since she's gone anyway." He considered this, then nodded. "The guest room, then. And Clara? Thank you. For everything, for being exactly who you are." She watched him climb the stairs to the small room they'd prepared but never used, and felt a warmth spread through her chest. Tomorrow, they'd stand before the town and claim each other. Tomorrow, she'd become Clara Ward in truth and law. Tomorrow, the borrowed life would become her own. But tonight, she had this moment, this quiet house, this honest man, this hard-won peace. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything she'd never dared to hope for, and somehow found anyway, in the last place she'd expected to look. Clara climbed into Rose's small bed, surrounded by the child's treasures, her wooden animals, her drawings, her collection of interesting rocks and feathers. This was what she was fighting for. This family, this home, this love. And tomorrow, she'd stand in front of everyone and claim it publicly, fearlessly, with her real name and her whole heart. She fell asleep with a smile on her face, dreaming of futures and promises, and a little girl who'd once whispered, "Stay," and made Clara believe that belonging was possible. Sunday morning arrived with a clarity that felt almost prophetic. Clara woke to find frost on the windows and her breath visible in the cold air. Winter was coming to the mountains, and with it, a new chapter of her life. She dressed slowly, savoring each moment, trying to calm the butterflies rioting in her stomach. Today, she would marry Elias Ward. Not as Eloise Bennett, the fabricated bride, but as Clara Bennett, the woman she'd always been. Elias was already downstairs, the smell of coffee drifting up through the floorboards. When Clara descended, she found him standing by the window in his Sunday suit, staring out at the frost-covered landscape. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and the look on his face made her breath catch. "You're beautiful," he said simply. Clara glanced down at the altered blue dress. Mrs. Kowalski and the other women had worked magic on it, removing the lace that had seemed too fancy and adding simple embroidery along the collar instead. It was honest now, like Clara herself was trying to be. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Me too." He crossed to her and took her hands. "But we're doing this together. Whatever happens in that church, whatever people say or think, we face it side by side." They heard a wagon approaching, Mrs. Kowalski returning Rose, no doubt. The child burst through the door moments later, her face glowing with excitement. She wore a new dress that Mrs. Kowalski must have made for her, yellow as sunshine, with her dark hair and ribbons. "Mama, Papa, today's the real wedding!" Rose threw herself at Clara, who caught her and held tight. "Mrs. Kowalski says after today, nobody can say you're not really married. Nobody can take you away." "That's right, sweetheart." Clara kissed the top of Rose's head. "After today, it's all official, forever and ever." "Just like I prayed for," Rose said with complete satisfaction. The ride into town was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Clara watched the familiar landscape roll by and thought about how much had changed since that first journey from Silver Creek to the ranch. She'd been terrified then too, but it was a different kind of fear. Then she'd been running from truth. Now she was running toward it. The church came into view, and Clara's heart began to hammer. There were more wagons than usual parked outside. More people milling around the entrance. Word had spread, clearly. The whole town had turned out to witness either a redemption or a scandal, depending on their perspective. As they climbed down from the wagon, Clara saw Mrs. Thompson standing with her cluster of disapproving friends. But she also saw Mrs. Kowalski and Martha Henderson, Mr. Chen and his family, the Callahans with their red-headed brood, people who'd chosen to stand with her despite everything. "Ready?" Elias offered his arm. "As I'll ever be." They walked toward the church together, Rose between them holding both their hands. People parted to let them through, some smiling encouragement, others whispering behind their hands. Clara kept her head high, focusing on the church doors ahead, on the life waiting beyond this moment. Inside, the church was packed. Every pew was full, with people standing along the walls. Reverend Calhoun stood at the front, his expression solemn. As Clara walked down the aisle, this time with Elias beside her, with Rose's small hand in hers, she felt the weight of every gaze, judging, assessing. waiting to see if she'd crumble under the pressure. But she didn't crumble. She walked steadily forward, claiming each step, until they stood before the minister. Reverend Calhoun raised his hands for silence, though the church was already quiet enough to hear a pin drop. "We are gathered here today," he began, his voice carrying to every corner, "under unusual circumstances. Most of you know why we're here. Some of you approve, some don't. But I ask you all to remember that we are in God's house, and God's specialty is redemption." He paused, letting that sink in, then continued. "Several weeks ago, I performed a marriage ceremony between Elias Ward and a woman who gave her name as Eloise Bennett. It has since come to light that the bride was actually Clara Bennett, Eloise's sister. This deception was wrong. It violated the sacred trust of marriage, of community, of honesty itself." Clara felt Rose squeeze her hand tighter. She wanted to close her eyes, to block out the condemning faces, but she forced herself to keep looking straight ahead. "However," Reverend Calhoun said, his tone shifting, "I have spoken at length with both Elias and Clara. I have prayed on this matter, and I have come to believe that while the beginning was flawed, the love between them is genuine. The commitment is real. The family they've built, including young Rose here, is worth preserving." A murmur ran through the congregation. Clara heard Mrs. Thompson's distinctive sniff of disapproval, but she also heard sounds of agreement. "Therefore," the minister continued, "we are here today to perform a new ceremony, an honest one. Clara Bennett will marry Elias Ward under her true name, in full knowledge of who she is and who he is. No deception, no lies. Just two people choosing each other with eyes wide open." He turned to Clara. "Miss Bennett, before we proceed, I must ask you to speak to this congregation, to tell them, in your own words, what happened and why you're here today." This was it, the moment of complete vulnerability. Clara's mouth went dry, but Elias's hand found hers and squeezed. She took a breath and turned to face the gathered townspeople. "My name is Clara Bennett," she began, her voice shaking but audible. "I'm 23 years old, and I came to Silver Creek under false pretenses. I pretended to be my sister because I was desperate to escape a life that was killing me slowly. My stepmother was cruel, and I saw the letters Elias had sent, saw the hope in them, and I wanted that hope for myself." She saw some faces softening, but pressed on. "I know that doesn't excuse the lie. Nothing excuses it. I stood before all of you and said I was someone I wasn't. I let you welcome me into your community under a false name. I betrayed Elias's trust, and I'm sorrier for that than I can ever express." Her voice broke slightly, but she steadied it. "But I need you to know that everything else was real. The way I loved Rose from the first moment, the way I fell in love with Elias as I got to know him, the way I came to love this town, this life. That wasn't pretend, that was me, Clara, not Eloise, giving my whole heart to a family and a future I never thought I'd deserve." She turned to Elias, tears streaming down her face now. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve this second chance. But if you'll have me, if you'll still want me, knowing everything, knowing exactly who I am, then I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of this gift you're giving me." Elias's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Clara, I know exactly who you are. I've known for weeks now, known your heart, your kindness, your strength. A name doesn't change that. You're the woman who brought light back to my life. You're the woman my daughter prays to keep. You're the woman I choose today and every day after." The church was utterly silent now, everyone leaning forward to catch every word. Reverend Calhoun cleared his throat, visibly moved. "Is there anyone here who objects to this union? Who believes, in good conscience, that these two should not be married? Speak now or forever hold your peace." Clara held her breath. This was when Mrs. Thompson would stand, would voice all her objections, would try to stop this. But it was Rose who spoke instead, her small voice cutting through the tension. "Nobody should object. Mama Clara and Papa love each other, and love is what God wants. Reverend Calhoun, you said so last Sunday. You said God is love, and we should love each other. So if they love each other, God must be happy." The simple logic from a child's mouth seemed to break something in the congregation. Clara heard soft laughter, saw smiles breaking through stern expressions. Even Mrs. Thompson looked momentarily uncertain, as if arguing with a 6-year-old's theology was beyond even her capacity for judgment. Well then, Reverend Calhoun said, his own lips twitching with a suppressed smile. I believe that settles it. Let us proceed. He opened his Bible and began the familiar words, but this time Clara heard them differently. This time, every word was truth. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God, and these witnesses to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. Marriage is an honorable estate, not to be entered into lightly, but reverently and with full understanding of its sacred nature. Clara felt the weight of those words, the full understanding, the sacred nature. Yes, this time she understood. This time it was sacred. Elias Ward, do you take Clara Bennett to be your lawfully wedded wife? Do you promise to love her, comfort her, honor and keep her, in sickness and in health, in prosperity and adversity, forsaking all others for as long as you both shall live? I do. Elias's voice rang out clear and certain, echoing through the church. And do you, Clara Bennett, take Elias Ward to be your lawfully wedded husband? Do you promise to love him, comfort him, honor and keep him, in sickness and in health, in prosperity and adversity, forsaking all others for as long as you both shall live? Clara looked at Elias, at Rose standing beside them, at the life she was being offered. I do, she said, her voice strong despite her tears. I absolutely do. The rings, please. Elias pulled out 2 simple gold bands, new ones, not the rings from the first ceremony. Clara understood the symbolism. These were untainted by deception, purchased honestly, meant for Clara, not for some fictional version of Eloise. As Elias slipped the ring onto Clara's finger, he spoke the traditional words with weight and intention. With this ring I thee wed. With my body I thee worship. With all my worldly goods I thee endow. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Clara's hand trembled as she placed the matching band on Elias's finger, repeating the vows that bound her to him truly, finally, completely. When she finished, Elias raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. By the power vested in me, Reverend Calhoun said, his voice full of emotion, I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no one put asunder. Elias, you may kiss your bride. This kiss was different from the first wedding's chaste peck. This was a claim, a celebration, a promise, all wrapped into one. When they finally pulled apart, the church erupted in applause. Not everyone was clapping. Clara could see Mrs. Thompson sitting with her arms crossed, but enough people were celebrating to make the sound thunderous. Rose threw her arms around both of them, laughing with pure joy. Now we're a real family, forever and ever. Forever and ever, Clara agreed, scooping Rose up and holding her tight. As they walked back down the aisle as Mr. and Mrs. Ward, truly this time, people reached out to touch Clara's arm, to offer congratulations, to welcome her properly into the community. Not everyone, but enough. More than enough. Outside, the autumn sun broke through the clouds, bathing everything in golden light. Mrs. Kowalski had organized a small reception in the church hall, and people filed in, the atmosphere lighter now, almost festive. Clara found herself surrounded by well-wishers. Martha Henderson pressed a jar of her famous preserves into her hands. The Callahans promised to come help with the roof repairs Elias had mentioned. Mr. Chen gave her a small silk handkerchief embroidered with flowers, a traditional gift he said his mother had given his father on their wedding day. For new beginning, he explained, clean slate, everyone deserves. Even some of Mrs. Thompson's friends defected, coming over to shake Clara's hand and admit that perhaps they'd been too quick to judge. Mrs. Thompson herself remained aloof, but Clara noticed she didn't leave. She stayed, watching from the edges, her expression unreadable. As the afternoon wore on and the celebration began to wind down, Clara found herself standing alone for a moment on the church steps. She looked out over Silver Creek, the small town that had become home, that had judged her and forgiven her in equal measure. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks touched with snow, eternal and unchanging. Mrs. Ward. Clara turned to find Mrs. Thompson standing behind her. For a moment, neither spoke.
I still don't approve of what you did, Mrs. Thompson said finally. Lying is lying, no matter how you dress it up. I know, Clara said quietly. I don't approve of it either. I wish I'd been braver from the start. But, Mrs. Thompson continued, as if Clara hadn't spoken, I've been watching you today, watching the way that child looks at you, the way Elias looks at you. And I remembered something. She paused, her stern expression softening almost imperceptibly. I was Sarah's friend, Elias's first wife. And before she died, she made me promise something. She made me promise that if Elias ever found someone else, I wouldn't make it hard for them. She said the new woman, whoever she was, shouldn't have to compete with a ghost. Clara felt her throat tighten. That was generous of her. Sarah was generous. Too generous for this world, probably. She loved Elias and Rose so much that she wanted them to be happy even after she was gone. Mrs. Thompson looked directly at Clara now. I've been breaking my promise to her, being so hard on you. I told myself it was about the lying, but really, I think I was angry that someone else was filling the space Sarah left, even though that's exactly what Sarah wanted. I'm not trying to replace her, Clara said softly. Rose knows who her real mother was. We talk about Sarah sometimes. I make sure Rose remembers. I know, Rose told me. That's part of why I'm here. Mrs. Thompson drew a deep breath, as if the next words were difficult. I can't say I like what you did, but I can say that Sarah would have. Approved of you, I mean. She would have seen past the lie to the love underneath. She was good at that, seeing people's hearts. It wasn't quite forgiveness, but it was understanding. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you for telling me that. It means more than you know. Mrs. Thompson nodded once, curtly, then surprised Clara by reaching out and squeezing her hand briefly. Take care of them, that's all I ask. Take care of that family. I will, Clara promised. I swear I will. As Mrs. Thompson walked away, Clara felt something release in her chest. She wasn't going to win everyone over, that much was clear. But she'd won enough. She'd won the people who mattered. She'd won Elias and Rose. She'd won her own self-respect by finally telling the truth. That was more than she'd ever expected when she'd stepped off that stagecoach all those weeks ago. There you are. Elias appeared beside her, Rose riding on his shoulders. We're ready to head home whenever you are, unless you want to stay and enjoy your newfound celebrity status. Clara laughed. I think I've had enough being the center of attention for one lifetime. Good, because Rose is getting hungry, and I may have promised her we'd stop by the creek on the way home to look for that blue stone she's been obsessed with finding. The one she's convinced is magic? That's the one. Elias grinned. Who knows? Maybe after today, it actually will be. They said their goodbyes and loaded into the wagon. As they rolled out of town, Clara looked back once at the church, at the life-changing moments that had happened there. 2 weddings in one small building, one built on lies, one on truth. Both had brought her here, to this moment, to this family. No regrets? Elias asked, reading her expression. Clara thought about it honestly. I regret the lying. I regret the pain I caused you when the truth came out, but I don't regret coming here. I don't regret fighting to stay. I don't regret falling in love with you and Rose. So no regrets about the outcome, even if the path was messy. Life is messy, Elias observed. Anyone who thinks otherwise is lying to themselves. They stopped at the creek as promised, and Rose insisted on taking off her shoes and wading in the cold water despite the temperature. She was convinced the magic blue stone was there somewhere, just waiting to be found. What would you wish for if you found it? Clara called from the bank where she and Elias sat watching. Rose considered this seriously. I don't need to wish anymore. I already got everything I wanted. Mama and Papa together, a real family, people who stay. She paused, then added, but maybe I'd wish for a baby brother or sister, someone to teach things to like you teach me. Clara felt her cheeks warm. Elias took her hand, his expression hopeful. Would you want that? He asked quietly. More children? Yes, Clara said without hesitation. I'd want that very much. The look he gave her was full of promise, of futures yet to be written. They sat in companionable silence, watching Rose search her creek, and Clara felt a peace settle over her that she'd never experienced before. This was belonging. This was home.
Not a place stolen or borrowed, but one earned through honesty and love and the terrifying courage of being fully known. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, they loaded back into the wagon and continued home. The ranch appeared in the distance, solid and welcoming, smoke beginning to curl from the chimney as the air cooled. "I should start dinner," Clara said as they pulled into the yard. Later, Elias helped her down from the wagon. "Right now, I want to carry my wife over the threshold. Properly this time." Before Clara could protest, he'd swept her up in his arms. Rose cheered and ran ahead to open the door. And then Elias was carrying Clara across the threshold of their home, not as Eloise, not as some fictional version of herself, but as Clara Ward, claimed and chosen. He set her down gently in the middle of the main room, and for a moment they just looked at each other, the magnitude of what they'd done settling over them. "We did it," Clara whispered. "We did it," Elias confirmed. Rose tugged on Clara's skirt. "Mama, can we have a celebration dinner with the fancy dishes Mrs. Henderson gave us?" Clara laughed. "Absolutely. We'll use the fancy dishes and cook something special and celebrate this new beginning properly." They worked together to prepare the meal, the three of them moving around the kitchen in synchrony born of weeks of practice. Rose set the table with great care, placing the new china plates just so. Elias opened a bottle of wine he'd been saving for a special occasion. Clara cooked the best meal she could manage, putting love into every stir and seasoning. When they finally sat down to eat, Elias raised his glass. "To new beginnings, to honesty, to the family we've built together." "To Mama Clara," Rose added, "who God sent after all." "To Rose," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion, "who taught me that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real." They clinked glasses, Rose with her milk, Clara and Elias with wine, and the sound seemed to seal something, to mark this moment as the true beginning of their life together. After dinner, after Rose had been tucked into bed with extra hugs and kisses, Clara and Elias found themselves alone for the first time as truly married people. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Elias had moved his things upstairs earlier in the week, and now he stood at the base of the stairs, looking uncertain. "I meant what I said about not rushing," he began, "about giving you time." Clara crossed to him and took his hands. "Elias Ward, we've been married twice. We've survived lies and revelations and public judgment. I think we've had enough time. Don't you?" His answer was a kiss that made her knees weak, that spoke of desire held carefully in check for too long. When he pulled back, both of them were breathing hard. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He swept her up in his arms again, carrying her up the stairs to the room they would finally share. Behind them, the house settled into comfortable evening sounds. The crackle of dying embers, the creak of old wood, the whisper of wind through the eaves. The sounds of home. Much later, Clara lay in Elias's arms, listening to his steady heartbeat beneath her ear. The window showed a sky full of stars, the same stars that had watched over her journey west, that had witnessed her transformation from desperate runaway to cherished wife. "What are you thinking about?" Elias murmured, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her back. "About how far I've come. How different this is from what I imagined. Better or worse?" "So much better. Impossibly better." She propped herself up to look at him. "I came here expecting to survive. Instead, I learned to live. You taught me that. You and Rose. You taught us too. You taught Rose that it's safe to love again. You taught me that hearts can heal if you let them." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "We're all better for having found each other. Even with all the mess? All the pain? Especially with the mess. That's what makes it real." He pulled her close again. "Perfect love stories are boring anyway. Give me a messy, honest, hard-won love any day." Clara smiled against his chest. "Then that's what we have. Messy and honest and entirely ours." They fell asleep wrapped in each other, and Clara dreamed of futures. Of Rose growing tall and strong, of other children filling the house with noise and laughter, of seasons passing, winters huddled by the fire, springs planting gardens, summers by the creek, autumns watching the aspens turn gold. Of growing old with this man who'd seen her at her worst and chosen her anyway. She dreamed of a life earned through truth, built on foundation of forgiveness, and sustained by love that didn't need perfection to thrive. When morning came, Clara woke to find Rose standing beside the bed, her wooden horse in hand, looking at her parents with satisfaction. "You're both here," Rose said, as if this confirmed some deep truth. "Together in the same bed, like real married people." Elias laughed, still half asleep. "Yes, little Rose, like real married people." "Good." Rose climbed onto the bed and wedged herself between them. "Now we're a proper family. Mama, Papa, and me. Forever and ever." "Forever and ever," Clara agreed, wrapping her arms around this child who'd saved her as much as Clara had saved her. "Nothing's going to change that." The three of them lay there as the morning light grew stronger, painting the room in shades of gold and amber. Outside, the ranch was waking up, cattle lowing, chickens clucking, the endless work of a working ranch calling. But for this moment, they stayed cocooned in blankets and warmth and the simple joy of being together. Eventually, hunger drove them downstairs. Clara made breakfast while Elias started on the day's chores, and Rose chattered about everything and nothing, her words a happy stream of consciousness about the wedding, about school starting soon, about the baby brother or sister she hoped Clara and Elias would make for her. "These things take time, sweetheart," Clara said, trying not to blush. "That's okay. I can wait. I'm very patient now." Rose said this with the utmost seriousness, as if patience were a new skill she'd recently acquired. The days that followed developed their own rhythm. Word spread through Silver Creek about the second wedding, and people's attitudes continued to shift. Mrs. Thompson never became warm, but she stopped being actively hostile. Others who'd been uncertain came around, won over by Clara's obvious devotion to her family and her refusal to hide from her past. When Clara went to town for supplies, people greeted her by name, her real name. "Good morning, Mrs. Ward. How's that husband of yours?" They invited her to quilting circles and church socials. They asked her advice on managing households in the harsh mountain winters. Slowly, steadily, she became simply Clara Ward, one of them, rather than Clara the liar who married Elias. It wasn't always easy. There were still people who looked at her with judgment, who whispered when she passed. But Clara found she could bear it because she had something stronger than their approval. She had truth and love, and a family that had chosen her with full knowledge of her flaws. One evening in late November, as the first real snow began to fall, Clara was helping Rose with her letters when she felt a wave of nausea. She excused herself quickly, barely making it outside before she was sick. When she came back in, pale and shaking, Elias was waiting with a cup of water and a knowing look. "How long?" he asked gently. "I'm not sure. Maybe a few weeks? I wasn't certain until just now." Clara's hand went instinctively to her still flat stomach. "I wanted to be sure before I said anything." Elias's whoop of joy startled Rose, who looked up from her letters with wide eyes. When Elias explained that she was going to be a big sister, Rose's face lit up with such pure happiness that Clara started crying, though whether from emotion or hormones, she couldn't say. "I prayed for this too," Rose said, coming to place her small hand on Clara's belly. "I prayed for everything, and God listened to all of it." That night, after Rose had finally been convinced to go to sleep despite her excitement, Clara and Elias sat by the fire and talked about the future taking shape inside her. They talked about names and nurseries and all the ways their family was about to grow. "Are you scared?" Elias asked. "Terrified," Clara admitted, "but also happier than I knew was possible. A year ago I thought I'd die in St. Louis, unloved and unwanted. Now I'm having a baby with a man I adore, raising a daughter who calls me mama, living in a home I helped build. It's miraculous. Not miraculous, earned." Elias kissed her temple. "You fought for this, Clara. You were brave enough to take the chance, brave enough to tell the truth when it mattered, brave enough to stay when leaving would have been easier. You earned every bit of this happiness." The winter passed in a blur of preparation. Clara sewed baby clothes while Rose helped, her small fingers learning to manage needle and thread. Elias built a cradle from pine he'd cut himself, carving small flowers into the headboard. Mrs. Kowalski and the other women brought gifts and advice, welcoming Clara fully into the community of mothers. Even Mrs. Thompson softened, bringing a quilt she'd made,
a peace offering, or perhaps an admission that Clara had proven herself after all. "Sarah would have liked you," Mrs. Thompson said as she presented the quilt. "She would have been glad her family found you." It was the closest thing to forgiveness Clara would get, and it was enough. Spring came to the mountains with a rush of green and wildflowers. And one warm May morning, with Elias holding her hand and Mrs. Kowalski attending, Clara brought a son into the world. He was small and perfect, with dark hair like his father and a cry that announced his presence to the entire ranch. "What will you name him?" Mrs. Kowalski asked as she placed the cleaned and swaddled baby in Clara's arms. Clara looked at Elias, at Rose who'd been allowed in to meet her new brother, at this child who represented every hope she'd ever dared to dream. "Samuel," she said, "Samuel Grace Ward, because we've been given grace we didn't deserve, and I want him to always remember that." "Samuel Grace," Elias repeated, testing it. "It's perfect." Rose peered at her brother with fascination, gently touching his tiny hand. "Hello, Samuel. I'm your big sister Rose. I'm going to teach you everything I know, and I'm going to tell you about Mama Clara, how God sent her to us when we needed her most, how she came with the wrong name but the right heart." Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, healing tears. She looked around at her family, her husband, her daughter, her newborn son, and felt the last pieces of her old pain falling away. Clara Bennett, the unwanted daughter, the abused stepdaughter, the desperate woman who'd boarded a westbound stage with nothing but lies and hope. That woman had been transformed. She was Clara Ward now, wife, mother, member of a community, a woman who'd been forgiven much and had learned to forgive herself. A woman who'd found home not by pretending to be someone else, but by finally having the courage to be herself. "Thank you," she whispered, not sure if she was talking to Elias, to God, or to the universe itself. "Thank you for seeing past the lies to the truth underneath. Thank you for giving me this chance." Elias leaned over and kissed her forehead. "Thank you for being brave enough to take it." Outside, the mountain wind sang through the new leaves, and the creek bubbled over stones worn smooth by time. Inside, a family gathered around a new life, bound together not by perfection, but by the messy, beautiful reality of being fully known and fully loved. Years later, when Rose was grown and Samuel was a teenager and 2 more children had joined the family, Clara would stand in the same room and remember that first winter. The lies and the revelation, the judgment and the forgiveness, the fear and the love that conquered it. She would remember being called Eloise and feeling like a fraud. She would remember the moment she reclaimed Clara and felt like herself for the first time in years. And she would remember a little girl who'd whispered, "God sent you after all," and made Clara believe in redemption. But that was in the future. For now, in this moment, Clara simply held her son and leaned against her husband and smiled at her daughter and felt the profound peace of being exactly where she belonged. Home, at last. Honestly and completely home. The story that had begun with a desperate deception on a westbound stagecoach had become a story of transformation, of grace, of love that could survive truth and emerge stronger for it. Clara Bennett had died the day she married Elias Ward under false pretenses. But Clara Ward had been born from that death, a woman redeemed by honesty, strengthened by hardship, and defined not by her mistakes, but by her courage to face them. And in the end, that was the truest thing of all. Not the name she'd arrived with, or the lies she'd told, but the woman she'd become in the loving. The mother, the wife, the friend, the member of a community who'd learned that grace isn't earned by